What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video and back with another retro format guide. I call them guides, but really they're just going through all the new cards and the new ban list for a new format that I'm going to be covering on the channel, which is Dad Return format, based around SJC Minneapolis in April 2008. Now, this format saw the release of one of the most powerful sets in the game's history, Phantom Darkness. This was a game-changing set on the level of Invasion of Chaos for the DM era. This is in the GX era, and it sort of breaks the game in a similar way, where Invasion of Chaos released a bunch of powerful new cards and also tools for old archetypes. One sort of new push of cards managed to overwhelm everything else and put the game into a major crisis. And the same thing happened here with the release of a brand new suite of dark monsters that were super strong, just based around manipulating the dark monsters in your graveyard and just bringing out big guys, destroying everything your opponent has and getting in for a ton of damage. So we are going to be talking about this format today. And this is definitely a controversial format, not as many people like this as some of the other formats that I've covered, like Perfect Circle, but it is still a fun format to actually look back on and explore. It's kind of like Chaos, where even if you're not going to get the most balanced gameplay, you are going to have some fun just slamming down cards if that's what you like to do. So this is a format for you if that sounds appealing. But let's first go through the ban list before we get to the new cards to actually talk about what makes this format so broken. So the ban list here actually didn't really change that much from Perfect Circle format. You can watch my video on Perfect Circle format to see more of a detailed breakdown on this. Although I think I just keep sort of kicking the can backwards, so referring you to previous videos to watch more detailed breakdown. But I will break down the new cards on the list. One, Breaker the Magical Warrior. That is banned now. It was banned before. They brought it back, and now they banned it again. They feel like this card's too powerful. Maybe it's because it's a dark, or maybe it's just because they want to sell more cards. I don't know. I think this card's honestly pretty fine, but I won't begrudge them banning it because it is pretty strong, so I can't really blame them for that. Next up is Magician of Faith, also banned now. They've sort of flip-flopped with Magician of Faith as well, deciding, no, it's actually better to have this thing banned again. And it makes some sense given one of the powerful new cards that is back, legal again, which we'll get to when we discuss the limited cards. But I don't necessarily know if this was warranted to just ban it. It seems kind of weird, especially because, I guess they semi-limited booked this format, so they brought it from 1 to 2, so maybe they're afraid, people can loop the Magician of Faith, but you got Tsukiyomi banned already, so I don't really know if this makes sense, but, this is a light monster as well, so it doesn't really slot in as neatly into the best deck in the format. So I don't really know why they banned this thing, but, it is what it is. Konami will work in mysterious ways sometimes. And speaking of mysterious ways, Call the Haunted now banned as well. And it's not really that mysterious why Call the Haunted's banned. It's a very powerful card, but it is kind of weird that they banned this thing and brought back another thing being legal. But other than that, the cards on this ban list are kind of like the who's who of, powerful cards. Another thing to note is that all the Chaos monsters are banned, so no Chaos Sorcerer even to play in this format. And I think that's the main sort of thing to know there. Ring Destruction is banned, so you don't have to play around that as well. You do have to play around Mirror Force, Interrupt Tribute, though they're not banned here. You have to play around Heavy Storm, that's not banned as well. But we can get into that in the limited section of the video here. For the limited cards, most of this is also carried over from past formats, but a big change that I don't know why they did this, but a big change that they made was bring Reborn to 1. For some reason, they were like, you know what? We need to ban Call the Haunted, but we want one revival card around here that can do something like that. So let's bring back Reborn. And I don't know why they needed this. This card is broken. It's so powerful. It plays really, poorly, not poorly, but poorly for gameplay experience wise with some of the most powerful cards that people are playing, like Destiny Hero Disc Commander. If you reborn your opponent's Destiny Hero Disc Commander, you're going to feel pretty good about that, but your opponent will not. So I guess it gets them to play a bit more around that. You can't be as willy-nilly with pitching a Disc Commander as you once was. But I don't know, it's still kind of a lot here, especially because DMOC is also being played, and you can reborn that, and it just leads to a lot more sack potential here. So I don't like that they actually brought this thing back to 1. But I do like some of the other hits that they made on this list here. Of course, a lot of this is standard, so you just have the Hero Engine limited, you got the Exodia piece limited, Treeborn Frog, DD Warrior Lake, Card Druid, etc. A lot of the things that, I mentioned in previous videos being limited already in previous formats, but Ryza is now limited as well. This was a dominant piece of the Perfect Circle Monarch deck in the last format. So it makes sense why they'd limit this thing to 1 to decrease the power of that deck. So I do like this thing being hit. Hopefully it'll allow other decks to sort of shine through. Although, the fact that other decks are shining through, they might not be necessarily better than Perfect Circle Monarch in terms of just a game health sense. We also got Advanced Ritual Art limited here. Now, I don't think that Demiso DK was really doing too much damage to the format, but it is kind of a sacky deck, so it makes sense why they'd want to limit this thing to 1 to prevent it from, just stealing games out of nowhere here. Although I don't really think that they can claim that that's what they're doing when they lead to this format being as sacky as it is. But, it is what it is. But yeah, we've also got Nobleman of Crossout coming back to 1 copy from 2 copies. This thing is also sort of flip-flopped on being limited or semi-limited and stuff. Here it is limited now. This card's very powerful, so it makes sense why they'd limit this thing. But I don't really have strong feelings about this thing being limited or semi-limited. It's just sort of fine-tuning the deck list a little bit. But lastly, we've got Ojamatrio now at 1 copy. This thing is very good in burn decks. It can also just be used to sort of gum up your opponent's field. So it is probably good that this thing gets limited. It's an annoying card all around. And the decks that play it are generally just degenerate. So, you don't necessarily want this thing being at tons of copies in the format. But again, they can't really claim that they're trying to clean up the health of the format when they leave the format what it is, which we'll get into as we go through the video. But anyway, that's going to be the new changes to the limited list. Again, as I mentioned before, Mirror Force and Trench Tribute, both limited here, so you do have to play around those. Crush Card Virus, also limited, so you have to play around that as well. Just good things to know about being limited, so that way you can play around them a little bit more. BrainCon also limited here, so you have to play around that. Those are the big ones that you'll have to be thinking about, like, okay, in this situation, will my opponent have this or that? And these are the real important cards to know about. Dust Shoot also limited here, but that card's a bit harder to play around when they've got it going first. But it's just a degenerate card. I'm sad that it's still legal in the format, but it is limited, so at least it's not like at multiple copies like in some other formats that are in the history of this game. So yeah, but I mean, I think that's all told like a fine limited list, just based on past formats. But the new card for Fan Darkness probably should have taken more of a hit on these lists. Lastly, I should mention the part of the list that went through the most changes, actually, which is the semi-limited list. They actually took a lot of cards off the semi-limited list. So before this, all the gadgets were semi-limited. You had Apprentice Magician semi-limited, but now Moth Span, you don't really need that on there. You had Jinzo semi-limited, and that is now, no longer restricted, so that's pretty cool that decks can play around with that guy again. You had Recruiter Swap semi-limited, but it does make sense that they'd get rid of that because Recruiter decks have not really been doing all too much, so you're probably fine having 3 of it. And then Reckless Greed was also semi-limited, and that is also off the list now, so you can play a bit more with that deck. Combo decks, I'm sure, will love that, but, Reckless Greed is not as busted as some other pieces that they're using in their decks because it does take a turn to set up, so I do get why they would sort of unlimit that completely. But going over the cards that are newly semi-limited, we've got Sidra here. This thing is very powerful, just being an aggressive body, free body on board, so it makes sense why they'd sort of cut down the power of this. We have Lad now semi-limited as well. Makes sense because the First Circle Monarch deck would play this thing to great effect, although I'm not really sure how many of those decks were playing 3. I'm not sure that semi-limiting it will really do much. Necroface also semi-limited. I think this is actually a really good hit because the sort of Necroface Banish Mill deck that I showed off in the Perfect Circle format video for it is definitely a bit degenerate, and I think semi-limiting this thing really decreases the power of that deck and what it can do. So I do think that it's probably a good hit. The deck can still go off, especially if it's recycling things like Burial and also using Soul Release to rebanish these cards. But I do think that semi-limiting this thing decreases the overall power of the deck, and that's a very, very good thing. Book of Moon now at 2 copies, very powerful card overall. I'm not upset to see this thing semi-limited instead of limited because this thing is very versatile and, there's a lot of utility in it in very interesting ways. So I think it's a very skill-intensive card to use correctly, and I do think it's ultimately a pretty fair card as well. So I like this thing being at more copies than less. We've got a, Burial here, now limited to 2, or semi-limited to 2, that is. And this thing, I don't really think it does much in a lot of the decks in this format. I think in this format in particular, in terms of like getting Darks engraved, that's something you have to be managing. So Foolish can be good in that respect. You can also, of course, send a Mally to the graveyard, which is still semi-limited. Thank goodness. This thing should not be at 3. So you can set things up like that, but I don't really think the many decks are going to be playing Foolish, but and if they do, they're probably not going to play it at 3 copies. But yeah, I don't think it's a bad hit just because, we know how crazy this card gets later in the game's history, and maybe there is something that you could do in this format that would really, unlock that power there. Next up, we got Mage Power. This thing is now semi-limited as opposed to being limited to 1, which I think is good. Get all the equipped cards off the limited list. We don't need them there. The decks that would play them and just OTK out of nowhere are a lot more fragile than some of the OTK decks running around now, so we don't really need them there. I'm glad to see this transitioning to the unlimited side of things. Magic Stone Activation also now semi-limited. I feel like this is kind of an iffy one to bring back to 2 because there are some FTT decks running around that might, appreciate this thing being semi-limited as opposed to limited. But, I don't think it's a terrible thing overall. I think that this thing is sort of, just an enhancer for those decks. It's not necessarily the make or break for those decks. So I don't really think that this thing being summon limited is that bad. But other than that, we got the Rhoda and the Decree, which were already semi, Mana Core's already semi-limited. Like, all these other cards are semi-limited already. But this definitely went through the most revisions here. And overall, I think the part of the semi-limited list here that got revisions is pretty good. That being said, I think the major flaws in this ban list are not necessarily what's on it, but what are not on it, which we will see when we get into the cards themselves that came out in Phantom Darkness. But let's just say that there are some cards here that probably should have gotten hit, way before they actually did. So, yeah, let's dive into the new cards that are released in Dad Return format and see exactly how broken they can be. Now, before we dive into Phantom Darkness itself, I'm going to slow roll things a bit. I'm going to sort of build up to the big reveal of the broken cards in that set by going through all the other cards that were released around this time. Now, most of the cards released around this time are actually a lot better than some of the cards that released previous to this. I think this was just a good time for card releases. Like, they sort of hit the sweet spot with a lot of their cards in terms of being things that you could actually see uses for, as opposed to just being unplayable garbage most of the time. And the stuff that were unplayable garbage were very clearly anime cards, so you can't really be too upset for that. Which is a very nice thing to see. I like that sort of era of card design, as opposed to the early GM era where, there are a lot of cards that are just like, why would you even play this? Like, what's the point of Yadokaru, right? Whereas now you get a bit more of a balance of things, and things to actually tinker with, things to be like, oh, could this work in a strategy? Let me try and figure that out. So I'm going to go through all these cards. Unfortunately, they're kind of overshadowed by the cards later in the video, but there are some good ones still here. The big one being Caius the Shadow Monarch. This thing was released in a structure deck based around banishing and using your banish pile, and also, tribute summoning out Caius, because this thing is very powerful. It is probably the new best Monarch now. Level 6 Fiend, 2400 attack, 1000 defense. If this card is tributed summoned, target one card on the field, banish that target, and if you do, inflict 1000 damage to your opponent if it is a dark monster. So right off the bat, the banishing effect, very, very good. It's a type of removal that is kind of annoying to deal with for a lot of decks. And also, if you manage to hit a dark monster, that's just icing on top of the cake, because, something like Zaborg, that already just removes something, right? But it doesn't even deal an additional damage on top of that, and it's already very good. So Caius being able to banish and on top of that potentially deal 1000 burn damage is very nice, especially when you can wind up in a low life point situation where your opponent has very low life points, maybe less than 1000, and if you tribute summon Caius, you can actually target itself to banish itself and then burn your opponent for 1000 to end the game. So this thing, very, very flexible, very, very good, and just absolute killer in this format. It's also a dark monster, which is very important because dark monsters are the best monster in this format by far. So you can use this for a variety of different things, and this thing is just cracked. Moving on, we've actually got some other really good cards from this structure deck. We've got Dimensional Alchemist next. There's a Light Fairy, level 4, 1300 attack, 200 defense. Says one per turn, you can activate this effect. Banish the top card of your deck, and if you do until the end of this turn, this card gains 500 attack. When this card you control is destroyed and sent to your graveyard, you can target one of your banished monsters to add it to your hand. Now, the thing's made wave in Edison format as being a very, very good card in the fairy decks there. And so I could definitely see this thing seeing play in some earlier formats as well. I think at the time, its true power was not really as well known as it is now, with more theory crafting and testing. I could definitely see this thing being very good, but I just think it's kind of outclassed by a lot of the decks running around in this format. But still, it's a fact that in a slower format, you can bring it out, basically get a resource banked for the future, and also just go up to 1800 attack, which is a very, very decent attack stat here. So very, very good stuff overall. Next up, we've got DDR, Different Dimension Reincarnation. There's an equip spell that says discard one card, then target one of your banished monsters, full summon it in an attack position, and equip it with this card. When this card leaves the field, destroy that monster. So, you can pair this with something like Caius, you can pair this with something like Dimalk. There's a lot of the different things that, can banish cards in this format, and then you can get it back with DDR. Pretty good effect overall. I think that it's kind of like a win more strategy for a lot of the decks that are running around here, because generally, you're using things like Return for the Different Dimension or things to just go for a big OTK push. And if you're just using this as like to bring back one monster, sure, that one monster can be very good, but generally they're just better cards that you can use instead of this. But I do think it's a pretty cool card overall. It can be searched with Iron Blacksmith Kotetsu, with a lot of the other, return from banished cards in this format cannot be, so that's kind of nice. But yeah, I just think it's outclassed by a lot of the other stuff running around here. Of course, these cards sort of relate more to the banish side of things, but the deck also featured stuff related to the tribute side of things. By Order of the Emperor is a very interesting continuous trap. Says when a monster effect is activated, that activates when a monster normal summon, you can negate the activation, then the player whose effect activation was negated draws one card. So this is kind of like pulling the rug, except it's pulling the rug with a downside, and that, if you use it to negate your opponent's monster, then they do get to draw a card from it. but it is also a continuous trap, so you can just keep using it to stop your opponent's monarchs from coming down and doing stuff. You can also use it to negate your own monarchs from doing things, or like Breaker the Magical Warrior. Well, actually, Breaker's banned. You can't do that, but there are other cards that trigger on normal summon that you could potentially use this thing to negate and give yourself a draw, which is kind of nice. So I think that this thing could be, there could be brews that you can cook up with this. That'd be kind of neat. But I think in this format in particular, it kind of suffers because a lot of the Monarch decks running around, are not really relying too heavily on the Monarch side of things, but more on other things. So, it's kind of rough. Yeah, it's just kind of an awkward card overall, but it is a very cool card, and I'm definitely curious to see what people could cook up with this. Lastly, we got Samsara Kaiser. This is a level 2 warrior, 200 attack, 100 defense. When you tribute summon a monster by attributing this card, return this card to your hand. That's a pretty bad card, in my opinion. I think this thing is not really worth playing. There are just better sort of loops that you can do with, like, if you want this sort of effect, you can probably do something better with like DD Survivor and Macrocosmos, right? Like that's a bit of a better combo than trying to do Samsara Kaiser, just get it back to hand. Kind of awkward. It can go back to hand for like DDR, I guess. That was their thought process for this, but I don't really think it's that good. So yeah, I think that's probably the worst new card released in the structure deck, but given the like pretty good nature of the other cards in the structure deck, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Of course, if you want a card to pair with tribute monsters that is not actually in the structure deck, we actually got one in the form of an Evil Hero Infernal Prodigy. They level 2 Fiend, 300 attack, 600 defense. If you control no monster, you can special summon this card from your hand in attack position once per turn during the end phase. If this card is attributed this turn, tribute summon a hero monster, draw 1 card. So generally, if you get that second effect off, it's pretty nice. You could play it in an Evil Hero deck playing like Evil Hero Malicious Edge. That's something you could play it with. Blade Edge you could also tribute it for, but that requires 2 tributes. Necro Shade I guess you could also do, but you generally don't want to be tribute summoning that guy out. So you can get the second effect off if you want to. But the big thing here is that it's a special summon that you can use to then tribute for a Monarch. So that's very nice. And also, unlike Sidra, you don't need to have your opponent have monsters to actually use this. You can just bring it out, tribute it for your Monarch, and then get going there. So I do think this card is pretty cool. I think Monarch-style decks might want to play it. I'm not sure if they will, because Sidra is still at 2 copies, so it still is around. But I do think it's another option that's kind of cool to have. Of course, this wasn't the only hero support card released as well. There were some new duels packs that came out, I believe, Jaden and also with Jesse. So there were some more hero support. Elemental Hero Prisma was the big elemental hero that came out. Level 4 warrior, 1700 attack, 1100 defense. As 1 per turn, you can reveal 1 fusion monster from your extra deck, and then send 1 of the fusion materials whose name is mentioned on that card from your deck to the graveyard. This card's name becomes the sent monsters until the end phase. And that actually pairs really nicely if you're playing an evil hero deck with Dark Calling. The normal spell that says fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck that must be special summoned with Dark Fusion, and banish the fusion materials mentioned on it from your hand and or graveyard. So this is kind of like the Miracle Fusion for evil heroes, and so you can combine it with the Prisma to great effect, especially given that we now have more evil hero fusions to actually go into if you want to play this sort of deck. Infernal Sniper is, I don't know, it's not really the best, but it is sort of playing off Rampart Blaster. But level 6, 2000 attack, 2500 defense point Fiend. It's made with Clayman and Burstendrix and must be special summoned with Dark Fusion, also Dark Calling. Cannot be destroyed by spell effects. 1 per turn during your standby phase. Inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. This card must be in face-up defense position to activate and to resolve this effect. So just like, the other evil hero fusions that we've seen up to this point, this card is just a strict upgrade to its elemental hero counterpart. Did a lot more things than that card does, and it's more protectable and less susceptible to your opponent's stuff, so that's very nice there. We also got Evil Hero Malicious Fiend, which is sort of like its own thing. It's not really like playing off an elemental hero fusion that I know of. This is made with Evil Hero Malicious Edge and 1 level 6 or higher Fiend monster, so kind of like with Evil Hero Dark Gaia, it is a bit flexible in terms of what its fusion materials are. And it has 3500 attack, 200 defense, and it says must be special summoned with Dark Fusion. During your opponent's battle phase, all monsters they control are changed to face-up attack position, and each monster they control must attack this card if able. Now, unfortunately, while cool effect on paper, your opponent can just play around it by not going into their battle phase. So, it's not the best overall, but it is a big body, so that's kind of nice. But Dark Gaia is definitely the better card, especially because you can actually do stuff with it with Dark Calling, because its fusion materials are a lot more flexible, just being a rock and a fiend. So, generally, you want to do Dark Gaia stuff if you're playing an Evil Hero deck, but it's still cool to have options like Malicious Fiend there. We've also got Evil Hero Wild Cyclone, level 8 Fiend Fusion, made with Avion and Wildheart. This is supposed to be sort of a play on the Elemental Hero Fusion that was made with those two, which I believe was like Wild Wing, maybe? I could be wrong about that, but it's definitely not one of the better fusions. But if this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate any spell traps until the end of the damage step, and then if this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, destroy all set spell traps that your opponent controls. So Not really the best on a monster with 1900 attack, but, you know, it is still something, I guess, for the evil hero fans out there, so it's still cool to see it rear its ugly head here. Lastly, for the new hero cards, we've got Heroes Rule 2, the counter trap that says negate the activation of a spell trap or affect monster's effect that targets a card or cards in the graveyard and destroy it. So this is kind of like Necro Valley in the form of a counter trap. Is it the best? I don't really quite know. I think that there aren't really too many cards that you really care about using this on. I guess Monster Reborn, of course, is a good one, but there are probably better things that you'd be playing instead. Something like DD Crow to banish the card out of your opponent's graveyard is very nice, or just playing other ways to, you know, manipulate the graveyard instead of this is probably a bit better than Heroes Rule 2. But of course, as I mentioned, Duelist Pack Jesse also came out, and that had the Crystal Beast support that we were all waiting for, Crystal Release. I mean, this thing isn't really that good. But, like, listen, Crystal Beasts are already down bad. They'll take this, right? It's an equip spell that says equip only to a Crystal Beast monster. Gain 800 attack. When this card is sent from field to the graveyard, you can place one Crystal Beast monster from your deck face up in your spell trap card zone as a continuous spell. So that is pretty good overall. Buffs up your Crystal Beast. If it's destroyed, you get out another Crystal Beast from deck. So, you know, that's about as good as the deck could ask for. The other Crystal Beast support cards are not really the best here. We got Crystal Pair is probably the next best one. The day Norm Trap says when a Crystal Beast monster you control is destroyed in battle and sent to the graveyard, place one Crystal Beast monster from your deck face up in your spell trap zone as a continuous spell. If you do, take no battle damage for the rest of your turn. So that's nice, I guess, but it's not really the best overall. It's kind of like Waboku, but an awkward Waboku because generally you want to be sending your Crystal Beast to your spell trap zone after they're destroyed by battle. But here you basically have to make the conscious effort to not put in your spell trap zone just to get out a different Crystal Beast from your deck into the spell trap zone. So it's not really the best overall. Next up, we got Crystal Treat, continuous spell that says each time a Crystal Beast monster is placed in either player's spell trap zone, place one crystal counter on this card. You can send this card to the graveyard, take a number of Crystal Beast monsters from your deck equal to the number of crystal counters that were on this card, then place them face up in your spell trap zones as continuous spells. So, you know, this is something that would be good in the mirror, I guess, but like, frankly, its final effect is kind of underwhelming. Basically does like what Crystal Paired is, and also Crystal Release, where you're getting Crystal Beasts out of your deck into the spell trap zone. But like none of these cards actually, you know, do things with them once they're there, right? There's not really a payoff for this. Like, of course, the payoff is like Crystal Abundance or Crystal Raigeki, which were released in Force the Breaker, which were sort of the, you know, main way that the deck would get advantage earlier on. But like, I think that those cards are not really the best overall, honestly. And so it would have been really nice to have different payout for these cards, but this is what we get, so it's what we'll work with. Counter Gem is the last one of the normal trap that is just kind of abysmal. It says send all cards in your spell trap zone to the graveyard. Place as many Crystal Beast monsters as possible from your graveyard face up in your spell trap zone as continuous spells. During the end phase of this turn, destroy all Crystal Beast cards you control. Now, you can see this being potentially good if you were playing a Rainbow Dragon deck and like it actually brought out from deck, because then you could bring out like 5 Crystal Beasts from deck, you know, get a ton of setup for your Rainbow Dragon. I think ultimately, like, that is sort of what these cards are doing. They're trying to set up the Rainbow Dragon by just, like, getting out a bunch of Crystal Beasts from deck. But, like, it's just, Rainbow Dragon is already pretty bad to bring out. It's very, very difficult, and it doesn't really do much on field. And this thing is just so awful because it brings back from grave. Like, there's not really much you're doing with that. It destroys all your spell traps that you already have, so you can't even really do much with it there. And also, it's as many as possible, so you'd have to, like, set all 5, you know, Crystal Beasts in your back row. I guess you could activate Rainbow Ruin then, and then bring out a Crystal Beast from the back row to your front row, and then go for like Crystal Abundance or something. But like, it's just, it's a card that just gets worse and worse the more you think about it, and the more you think about what it would actually take to make this thing work. So this thing is pretty bad overall. Of course, there were some decent cards in the Duelist packs. Hand Destruction, I'm pretty sure, came from a Duelist pack, although I could be wrong about that. But yeah, this thing is actually pretty good for a variety of decks. Quick play spell that says each player sends 2 cards from their hand to the graveyard, then draws 2 cards. Now, as a note, you can't use this if either you or your opponent have less than 2 cards in graveyard, or in hand, that is, not in graveyard. You can use it with no cards in graveyard if you want to. But this thing is just pretty nice overall, just digging deeper into your deck. So for decks that do want to just deep draw, this thing is a must include. Next up, we've got Doom Caliber Knight. This is a Dark Monster Fiend, 1900 attack, 1800 defense, that cannot be special summoned. When a monster effect is activated, quick effect, tribute this face-up card, negate the activation if you do destroy that monster. Now, this thing was very hyped up at its time of release, and also was played a fair bit on a competitive level. But in hindsight, people realize how awkward this thing is. While it does have good stats and can negate your opponent's thing, its effect is mandatory, right? You have to negate the first monster effect that activates when it's on the field. That means that you can't use your monster effects, and also your opponent can pretty easily trigger it through a variety of means. If they've got DD Crow, they send DD Crow you to negate this thing. So it's kind of like Lad in that respect, where like your opponent can play around it, but just like Lad, it does have its uses. Like if it actually does negate something good, that's very nice. And also just a big body that your opponent might have trouble dealing with, even outside its negation effect. So I think this thing could see a place in different decks in the format, but like overall, it's not really the best right now, I don't think. Moving on to some of the cards that I think are a bit worse than Hand Destruction Doomcal. We've got some cards that I think, like, you can see what they're going for here. You can see the vision, but it's unclear exactly how it necessarily works. Although these cards do get broken in the modern day. Firstly, we got Grinder Golem as a level 8 Dark Monster Fiend. Cannot be normal summoned or set. Must first be special summoned from your hand to your opponent's side of the field by special summoning 2 Grinder tokens. Fiend type Dark, level 1, 0 attack, 0 defense, and face-up attack position on your side of the field. If you special summon this monster, you cannot normal summon or set monster the same turn. So this is kind of like Lava Golem, except a bit worse because not removing your opponent's stuff. But I think they were trying to do this like with like probably a remove brainwashing sort of thing, or if you've got a deck that's like tributing cards on your side of the field, this gives you 2 things to tribute, I guess. So you can see the vision there, and you can see how people could definitely cook with this thing. But I just think it's worse than Lava Golem in pretty much every situation, until, of course, you get to the modern day, in which case, you know, you can actually use those tokens for more things than you could back in the day. But right now, this thing is not really the best. Next up, we got Phantom Skyblaster, another card that is also problematic in the modern day. For similar reasons, the level 4 Fiend Dark, 1100 attack, 800 defense, says when this card is normal summon or flip summon, you can special summon any number of Skyblaster tokens, which are Dark Fiend, level 4, 500 attack, 500 defense, up to the number of monsters you control, that is. Once per turn during your standby phase, you can inflict 300 damage to your opponent for each Skyblaster monster you control. Skyblaster monsters that you control cannot declare an attack during the turn you activate this effect. Now, this is the only Skyblaster monster in the game right now, and also the Skyblaster tokens will count as Skyblaster monsters. So, you know, it's basically burning based on that. But the main reason you do this, I'm pretty sure, just for Raviel combos, so you can bring out Raviel. But Raviel isn't really the best Sacred Beast even at all, and there's better things you can probably be doing with those resources. So I don't really think this thing is that good, but it's still kind of neat to just summon out a guy, get a bunch of bodies on board, maybe use those for things that we'll get into later in the video. So I definitely see the vision there. It's just I don't really think there isn't anything that you can do with this thing now that's actually like better than doing other things instead. Next up, we got Grave Squirmer. This is a level 1 Dark Fiend. It's 0 attack, 0 defense. So if this card is destroyed by balance at the graveyard, target 1 card in the field, destroy that target. Basically, it's a worse New Doria. Like, New Doria is just better than the thing in pretty much every way. So I don't know why they made this thing. I think I do because it was like an anime card, but like New Doria is just better. So just play that instead. Next up, we got Armor Breaker, Earth, level 3 Union Warrior, 800 attack, 800 defense. It says once per turn, you can equip this card to a warrior type monster you control, or unequip it to special summon this thing in face-up attack position. While equipped to a monster by this card's effect, each time the equipped monster inflicts battle damage to your opponent, destroy 1 card on the field. So that's kind of neat. You can use it to just pop your opponent's things. You can even pop your own things if you got something that you want to pop. So that's kind of cool. But I think overall, this thing is a bit more trouble than it's worth. You're probably better off using other just 1-for-1 removal cards instead, because in order to make this thing really worth it, I mean, I guess it protects the monster that it equips as well, but it does cost you a normal summon, and normal summons are at a premium in the game, or at least they should be, which we'll get into later in the video. But it does cost you a normal summon. It's only on warrior type monsters, so that's kind of awkward. It's an Earth on top of that. And if your opponent removes it with a spell trap, then that's kind of unfortunate. It didn't buff up the monster's attack as well, so ultimately it's cool for sure, but it's sort of like win more because the monster that you have to equip it to actually already be good on its own. If it's already good on its own, you really want to, you know, put a normal summon into that to make it slightly better. I don't necessarily know. There's probably just better cards to play here instead. Next up, we got Card Ejector, the level 3 Earth Spellcaster, 400 attack, 400 defense. This is 1 per turn. You can target 1 card in your opponent's graveyard, banish that target. So it's basically like DD Crow, except you can do it every turn. So on paper, that seems pretty good, but in practice, it's pretty bad because you've got to keep this thing around. So you got to invest resources into keeping it around there. And also, you know, if your opponent is on a deck that doesn't really value their graveyard as much, this thing's going to get you a lot less value than something like DD Crow, which can be used in a lot more flexible ways. For instance, beta down to Doom Caliber negate, getting another Dark in your grave for the plays that we'll mention later in the video. So Card Ejector, I think, is just not really as good as DD Crow, but it's still cool to see them trying to sort of make cards that actually fit a very specific niche, and you know, I just like it. I like that these cards are actually somewhat playable. I can see a use case for them as opposed to some of the ones earlier in the game's history. Next up, we got Hannibal Necromancer, the level 4 Dark Spellcaster, 1400 attack, 1800 defense. If this card is normal summon, place 1 spell counter on it, max 1. You remove 1 spell counter from this card, then target 1 face-up spell trap or just trap on the field, destroy that target. So this is basically like a worse Break of the Magical Warrior. Maybe that's why they banned Break. Maybe they wanted to sell this card. Although this card's really bad, so there's not really a reason to sell it. This thing would mainly hit things like, I guess, Rivalry of Warlords, Gravity Bind, etc. I can't pop Skill Drain because Skill Drain will negate its effect, unfortunately. But I guess if you really, really want more side deck hate, you know, you can bring this in, but this thing is just not really that good overall. Next up, we get into Mutant Mind Master, which is one of the worst cards I've seen in a long while. This is a level 6 Dark Spellcaster, 0 attack, 2500 defense. Says when this card declared an attack, you can take control of one face-up attack position monster your opponent controls and attack with it instead of this monster. You cannot attack your opponent directly. Return to your opponent at the end of the battle phase. Now, you could argue that there's... Actually, no, you couldn't even argue that. I was going to say there's some merit into taking your opponent's thing and then using it for something, but like the main thing you'd be using it for is like a tribute summon, assuming that you'd manage to bring this thing out and survive the turn, and then you attacked in with it to then tribute it over for another monarch or something. But it is returned at the end of your battle phase, not the end of your turn. So you can't really do things on top of that. Yeah, this thing's just really bad. Yeah, and also, in order to attack in, it has to be an attack, obviously, and so that already makes it kind of rough because, you know, it's very, very vulnerable with 0 attack. So this thing's just awful. I really can't see much of a use case for this thing, but maybe there's some deck you can play it in. It's just very, very awkward. It gives your opponent back the thing that you took from them, so it's not really even getting much advantage there, so it's just bad overall. Next up, we've got Vandalgion, the Dark Dragon Lord. This is sort of a, you know, boss monster for counter decks, like counter fairies or something like that. But it's a dragon for some reason, so I don't know why they did that. 2800 attack point guy, 2500 defense. So if you negate the activation of an opponent's spell trap card or an opponent's monster effect with a counter trap, except during the damage step, you can spell summon this card from your hand. If summoned this way, activate these effects and resolve in sequence depending on the types of card negated by that counter trap. Spell, inflict 1500 damage to your opponent. Trap, target one card your opponent controls, destroy that target. And monster, target one monster in your graveyard to summon it. So on paper, that seems like a kind of neat effect that it gets to do something after you negate something. So it's like, you know, you're getting even more advantage out of things. But realistically, the only effect you really want here is the trap effect. Monster effect could be nice, but most decks that are playing heavy counter traps are not really, you know, playing too many monsters. So you're not really going to get the monster part of that off all that often. And also, like, after the thing actually comes out on field, it's just a 2800 beat stick. Sure, you could do something that, like, gets it back to hand. Like, if you got Begone Knave up, and you attack him with this thing, bounce back to hand, and then you can negate one of your opponent's things to then bring it out again. That's kind of neat. But, like, I feel like that's a very convoluted combo, and not really worth just, you know, investing the space in your deck for this card. Like, counter fairy decks, they do get some support in this set. Like, not much, but they get a little something to help them out. And I think that this is not really worth playing in those decks, because the thing that they get to help them out also does not really negate an activation of an effect or a monster effect or something like that. So I don't necessarily think this thing is worth playing here. But last one, we got Revoked Fusion. The normal spell that says discard one polymerization to the graveyard, send one fusion monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, and special summon one monster from your hand that is listed on as a fusion material on that card. The special summon monster is sent to the graveyard during the end phase of this turn. So, you know, the astute among you might realize that, like, if instead of this card that you were playing, you actually played the fusion material that you need in addition to the other fusion material you had, you could just fusion summon the monster. This thing's really bad. This thing is awful. This thing's not good. Yeah, the thing's just not good. It just fails on a lot of different levels. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a use case for this. I can't think of one. There's, like, if you want to special summon a monster from hand, there are also other ways to do that are much less resource intensive. So this thing's just kind of awful overall. Yeah, don't play this thing. This thing is probably the worst card of these. And that's saying something because Mutant Mind Master was in this section. But I think Revoked Fusion might be a little bit worse. But that's going to do it for the non-Phantom Darkness cards that were released in this time period and are new to the format. Let's dive into Phantom Darkness itself and see what new cards were released there and why it broke the game. Sorry about this. I had to slow roll you one more time because Phantom Darkness, unfortunately, has too many cards to actually fit on one dueling book screen. I like presenting on dueling books. So we are going to split up the sections into a Phantom Darkness cards that actually support previous strategies and Phantom Darkness cards that basically are their own new things. So we're going to start with the support cards because I want to emphasize how good a lot of this support would be in a vacuum, right? And this is sort of something that Invasion of Chaos did as well. It released a lot of cool support cards for other strategies that you could do. And that's really exciting, but unfortunately, it's a bit overshadowed by what's going on with the other cards in the set. But a lot of the support is really cool. Of course, you've got the basic sort of anime support sort of falling in line with the Duelist packs there. So we have Crystal Beast support, we have Elemental Hero support. Let's start with the Crystal Beast support. Rainbow Path is a normal trap card that says when an opponent's monster declares an attack, send one Crystal Beast card from the spell trap zone to the graveyard, then target the attacking monster and negate the attack. And if you do, and then you can add one Rainbow Dragon or Rainbow Dark Dragon from your deck to your hand. We'll get to Rainbow Dark Dragon later. But Rainbow Dragon there. So if you do want to play pure Crystal Beasts, you've got another tool for that. And of course, as we mentioned, there are a lot of new cards that actually set up more Crystal Beasts in your spell trap zone there. So I don't think the thing is that terrible. There's also a Rainbow Neos, which combines Crystal Beast and Neos support in one thing. It's made with Elemental Hero Neos and one Ultimate Crystal Monster, which does include Rainbow Dragon, don't worry. So, basically just Elemental Hero Neos and a Crystal, not Crystal Beast, Rainbow Dragon there. 4,500 attack, 3,000 defense. It must be fusion summoned with the above fusion materials. Once per turn, you can activate one of these effects. Send one monster you control to the graveyard, shuffle all monsters your opponent controls into the deck. Send one spell trap you control to the graveyard, shuffle all spell traps your opponent controls in the deck. Or send one card from the top of your deck to the graveyard, shuffle all cards from your opponent's graveyard into the deck. So, it's pretty cool. It's got different effects based on what you want to do. It is kind of tricky to pull off, but as a note, this is not made with contact fusion. This is made with normal fusion summoning. So if you do have ways to search out the Rainbow Dragon and the Neos, and, Rainbow Path is a way to search out the Rainbow Dragon. Neos is searchable through a variety of means as well, like Emergency Call or Stratos. Then you can actually make this thing relatively easily. You can also use Elemental Hero Prisma, which we mentioned, to count as one of the fusion materials. Which I believe will count for it. I could be wrong about that, but I believe you can use a Prisma that's treated as that for this thing. Let me know in the comments down below if I am wrong. But either way, it's a cool boss monster, and it's more accessible than most Neos boss monsters are. So I think that's pretty cool. But of course, this wasn't the only Neos boss monster released here. This is the GX era after all. So we got to release Elemental Hero Storm Neos as well. They Wind Warrior, 3,000 attack, 2,500 defense. Made with Elemental Hero Neos, Neospace and Air Hummingbird, and Neospace and Aqua Dolphin. Must purchase special summon from your extra deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. Once per turn, you can destroy all spell trap cards on the field. Once per turn in the end phase, return this card to the extra deck. If this card returns into the extra deck this way, shuffle all cards on the field into the deck. So that's kind of a neat sort of effect. You can sort of reset the board state. However, it's happening in your end phase, so that means that your opponent will then have the initiative to do things on the new board state. So it's a bit awkward there. But it's still cool. I think it's a neat card, kind of like some of the other Elemental Hero fusions that they're doing with like multiple Neospacians in a Neos. I like that it has an additional effect upon being returned to the extra deck. But I just think this thing is just bad because Neos fusions are generally bad. You want to be investing things into a boss monster that'll stick around. You don't necessarily want a boss monster that will send everything back. But if your worry is this card sticking around, then, Phantom Dark Next released a way to sort of keep it around for longer, which is Instant Neospace. There's an equipped spell. It's equipped only to a fusion monster that has Elemental Hero Neos as a material. It does not have to activate its effect during the end phase, shuffle itself into the extra deck. And if the equipped monster leaves the field, you can special summon one Elemental Hero Neos from your hand, deck, or graveyard. So that's a way to sort of mitigate the Storm Neos there. So you shuffle everything back, and then Instant Neospace can bring out an Elemental Hero Neos. So that's a very, very nice ability. And also as a note, it says it does not have to activate its effect during the end phase. So you can actually activate the effect shuffle into the extra deck if you want to, which in the case of Storm Neos is very good there. So I think that this card was sort of made with that in mind, and I do appreciate that they actually put that in there. And I think this thing is pretty decent if you're going for that strategy. Of course, the strategy itself is pretty bad. So, a decent card for that strategy, for a bad strategy on top of that, is not really going to help too much. But, I think it is cool that they're trying to actually build something relatively cohesive out of the mess of Neos fusions here. Of course, speaking of Neos fusions, we got Neospace and Twinkle Moss as well. The level 4 Light Plant Fusion effect, 500 attack, 1100 defense. This card's name is also treated as Neospace and Glow Moss, and then this card cannot be special summoned except with Nex, very similar to Neospace and Marine Dolphin, which we saw in a previous set there. And when this card attacks or is attacked, draw one card, reveal that card, and then based on that type, activate the proper effect. Monster and the battle phase spell, you can change this card's attack to direct attack, and then trap this monster is changed to defense position. So I'm pretty sure those are the exact same effects that Neospace and Glow Moss had. However, this thing, this thing is basically just Neospace and Glow Moss, but worse because it takes more investment. And while Marine Dolphin actually had a purpose, because you go into Marine Neos with Marine Dolphin, which is a slightly better version of Neospace and Aqua Dolphin, there are no Twinkle Neos, as far as I know. So this thing is just very, very useless at this point in time. Maybe there will be a Twinkle Neos released in the future to make this thing actually have a use, but even with that, I don't think people are going to be playing Nex to go into this thing. The thing is just pretty bad overall. So it looks cooler than Glow Moss. That's something, but realistically, there's no reason to actually play this in your deck. Next up, for other heroes, we actually have Destiny heroes as well, getting some support. Some pretty bad support, but still support is support. We get Destiny hero Dunker here, Dark level 4 warrior, 1200 attack, 700 defense. So you can send one Destiny hero card from your hand to the graveyard and inflict 500 damage to your opponent. So not once per turn. If you've got multiple Destiny heroes in your hand, you can just keep doing it, burning your opponent down. Unfortunately, you're not probably going to have too many, but still, it's something you can do. And the stats in this thing for Destiny hero are not terrible, which is very, very sad, but Destiny heroes just have bad stats all around. So what can you do? Next up, we get Destiny Hero Departed. which is one of the worst design cards I've ever seen. This thing is so bad. I mean, it's like, let's read through the effect together and you'll see what I mean. Firstly, it has 1000 attack or defense, so pretty bad stats overall. And then during your standby phase, if this card's in your graveyard, special summon an attack position to your opponent's side of the field. So you're giving your opponent free resource. Okay, let's continue. If this card is destroyed by battle, banish it instead of sending it to the graveyard. If a card effect would send this card to the graveyard from the hand or deck, banish it instead. Okay, so the only ways to get this in your graveyard is to have it be destroyed by a card effect, or I guess tributed as well. So tributed or destroyed by a card effect, that's the only way to get it in your graveyard. You can't use Dunker to get it in graveyard because then it'll be banished. So, and then if you go through those hoops, then what you get out of it is it going to your opponent's side of the field during your standby phase. I mean, that, I have no words to express how bad that is. Like, this thing is just awful. I really can't see a use for it. Maybe I guess return, if you do like remove brainwashing, like that's something maybe. Like, I don't know, Owner's Seal, maybe you're doing combos with that, but like at the same time, like if you do like remove brainwashing, you're just getting a really weak monster on your field. I guess that's fine if you like want to tribute it again. So I guess the combo with this thing is like you go Departed, tribute Departed for a monster, and then during your next standby phase, this will come back to your opponent's side of the field, activate, remove brainwashing, get it back, tribute it again. So you can like keep tributing this thing. But like that is a multiple card combo. Also, like you have to keep your Departed protected, which is very hard to do, or you got to destroy it by card effect, which is also, you know, kind of annoying to do. So this thing is just really bad. I don't know what they were thinking with this thing. I think this is an anime card, so that's why it's got so many hoops and why it's the way that it is. But it's just overall pretty bad entirely, right? Of course, there were other anime support cards here. Dark World's got support, and this is an anime archetype. Season 3 actually introduced this thing along with the Evil Heroes. So yeah, I will count it as an anime archetype here. And Dark World Grimoire is a kind of interesting inclusion to the archetype. This was actually played in the anime, so that's kind of cool. Continue a spell that says during your end phase, if you discard a monster to the graveyard because you had more cards than your hand size limit, you can target one of those monsters and then special summon that target. Now, this thing being released, like, it's very clear why they made this, so that way, like, you know, if you have to discard your Dark Worlds to something that's not in effect, then you actually get it back, like, with hand size. But realistically, that's never really going to happen, so it's not really the best here. This actually can make sort of like, not an FTK, but it can make, like, an infinite loop in a way that kills your opponent. If you have a kind of convoluted setup, there are a couple different things you can do. Basically, you pair this thing with the Wicked Worm Beast, and what happens is you pitch the Wicked Worm Beast in your end phase to hand size. It comes back with Grimoire. You get to bring it back to hand with Worm Beast effect, pitch it to hand size, bring it back with the Grimoire, add it to hand. And so it's basically an infinite summon loop. And if you've got ways to leverage that to your advantage, like one combo that I've seen is Soul Absorbing Bone Tower, which is a zombie that when a zombie is special summoned, you get to mill your opponent out a bit. So if you've got DNA Surgery on field as well to change your Wicked Worm Beast into a zombie, then you basically keep getting that thing out and milling your opponent down by a lot. I could definitely see other things, like I think Cyber Summon Blaster, I think, is the name of that card, that the continuous trap that deals 300 damage to your opponent whenever you special summon a machine. So if you've got the DNA Surgery marking it as a machine, then you can do stuff with that. But realistically, that combo is just a bit convoluted, and it's not really going to go off all that often, but it's still a cool thing that exists now. I like it because it's not really that consistent, and if it ever does go off, you know, I just got to applaud my opponent for actually doing something with that. But the better piece of support for Dark Worlds is probably Fine. This card, like its name, is just fine. It's a normal trap that says discard 2 cards. Realistically, you don't necessarily want to be doing this because you're going hard minus a lot of the time. But in Dark Worlds, you know, this does count as discarding by a card effect, so you will get your effects off there, and you can actually use it in, like, your opponent's turn to potentially do stuff, pitching a Cocky or a Gorilla or something like that to, you know, pop your opponent's stuff. So it does have some uses there. But realistically, this thing is not really that good. It's fine, probably, but it's not really the best. Next up, we've got Cyber Dragon support, and one of the Cyber Dragon support is actually one of the most busted cards in the set, and that is Cyber Valley. Just like with, you know, Dimensional Alchemist that I mentioned earlier, this thing, it was definitely used at the time, but I feel like the true potential of this card has fully been unlocked by people experimenting with it further and seeing how busted it can actually be. Of course, this thing was played a lot, and people did some busted things with it, but, you know, this thing is just one of the coolest cards in the game at this point. And I'm happy to talk about it here. It's a light level 1 machine, 0 attack, 0 defense. This is more just cyber in general, so like not necessarily Cyber Dragon stuff, but I'm going to count it here either way. And it says you can activate one of these effects. One, when this card started for an attack, you can banish this card, draw one card, then end the battle phase. I feel like that was the version of the effect that I definitely used when playing this card, like player on Yu-Gi-Oh style. I was like, oh boy, it just fades the battle phase. Isn't that nice, right? But the second two effects are where it really, really shines. You can target one face-up monster you control in this card, banish both those cards, then draw 2 cards. And also you can target one card in your graveyard, banish both this card and one card from your hand, then place that target on top of the deck. Now this can be used in some pretty nasty ways in some FTK strategies. Being able to bring this out, machine dupe, draw a bunch of cards, bring it back with things like Dimension Fusion, stack back your Dimension Fusion if you want to, potentially banishing a Demok from hand as well, or doing crazy stuff like that. There's a lot you can actually do with this thing, and it provides a lot of setup for you. It provides you a lot of draws, and it's just cracked beyond belief. So I love this thing. I think it's so cool, and I look forward to seeing what people do with it in the future. Next up, we got Cyber Ouroboros, which is clearly made with Cyber Valley in mind. Because in fact, it does synergize with it. It's a dark level 2 machine. 1 attack, 6 defense. When this card is removed from play, you can send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard to draw 1 card. That's how you know this thing is not really that good, because it's never gotten an errata, because you remove from play instead of banish. So, the idea though here is that like you banish it off Cyber Valley, draw 2 cards, then you get to use Ouroboros to pitch a card and then draw another card. So that's kind of neat. But actually, I'm not sure if it'll actually trigger, because it's a when you can. So, it can miss timing. And I'm actually not sure if the banishing and the drawing happen in the same instance. I think it might not, because it says then draw 2 cards. So actually, you won't even be able to use Ouroboros. So, yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, I think that this just misses timing in all the effects. So actually, this thing's pretty bad. But it's a cyber monster. They're trying to make it synergize. It just doesn't really synergize that much. Next up, we got Armored Cybern. This is a level 4 machine union. 0 attack, 2,000 defense. It says 1 per turn, you can either target 1 Cyber Dragon you control or 1 fusion monster you control that lists Cyber Dragon as a fusion material. Equip this card to that target or unequip this card until summon it. Once per turn, while equipped to a monster by this effect, you can target 1 face-up monster on the field. The equipped monster loses exactly 1,000 attack, even if this card leaves the field, and if it does, destroy that target. If the equipped monster would be destroyed by battle or by card effect, destroy this card instead. So there's a way to provide more removal for you, but the unfortunate thing here is that, like, if you equip it to a Cyber Dragon to pop like a Monarch or something, pretty much anything else can get over that Cyber Dragon. Sure, Cyber will pop itself to protect it, but still you're making your monsters very weak. And if you equip it to a Fusion monster to pop an opponent's monster, like, what's the point? Because the Fusion monsters can get over pretty much anything on their own anyways. So this thing is not really that good in my opinion, but it's still cool that they're continuing to release support for these GX anime archetypes here. It also got some more spell trap support as well. Cybernetic Hidden Technology, the better of the two, is a continuous trap that says when an opponent's monster declared an attack, you can send to the graveyard 1 Cyber Dragon you control or 1 fusion monster you control that lists Cyber Dragon as fusion material, and then target the attacking monster to destroy that target. So I think the idea here is to pair with Cybern kind of in a way where you've weakened your monster so much, and then you activate Cybernetic Hidden Technology to then pop an additional thing after your opponent tries to attack into it. But frankly, that's not really that good, because you're sort of going against what the Cyber strategy wants to be doing, which is just bringing up big machine monsters and beating in your opponent's face. So I don't really think this fits the strategy that much, but it's still kind of cool that it gives the strategy another sort of thing to work with, I guess. The last card here is just really, really awful. This is Cybernetic Zone, a quick play spell that says select 1 face-up machine type fusion monster you control and remove from play until the end phase of this turn. When that monster returns to the field, double its attack. During your next standby phase, destroy it. So it's just like, when would you have the opportunity to use the monster you summon beyond just being a defensive wall on your opponent's turn? Because it's removed from play until the end phase of this turn. So if you activate it on your turn, then it's around for your opponent's turn, but then it comes back to you and it's destroyed during your standby phase. If you activate it during your opponent's turn, it comes back and it's pretty much immediately destroyed during your standby phase. So it's just like, I don't get why this thing is here. Doesn't really do much. Doesn't even protect your monster like something like an interdimensional matter transporter would, in terms of like returning it to dodge removal, because it just removes it itself. So I just don't get it. I don't think this thing is that good. Maybe there are some things you can do with, like, cards that, Catapult Turtle, for instance, that, no, you can't even use that because you have to do it during your main phase. So yeah, Ring of Destruction is banned, so you can't really do anything with that either. So I just don't know. I don't know why this thing's here. It's just not really that good in my opinion. Next up, we've got Volcanic support. The classic Volcanic deck that was released from Force of the Breaker. This support card actually is pretty good for the deck, though. It's level 3 Pyro, Volcanic counter. 300 attack, 1300 defense. It says when you take battle damage while this card's in your graveyard, banish it from your graveyard. Then if there is a fire monster other than Volcanic counter in your graveyard, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the amount of battle damage you took. And so this can allow you to get really aggressive with the burn stuff. So that's pretty nice. yeah, I think it's just a nice card overall. This did see some play later on in Edison format at a certain point where, people were trying out like Amarillo stacks and using this as an additional burn tool in that. It's sort of fallen out of favor there, but I could definitely see this being used in an aggressive burn strategy. It's also milling things to your graveyard, so that's kind of neat. Pretty cool card overall. Next up, we got Venom support, and this is actually exactly what the Venom deck needed. And it's kind of wild. Now, when I say it's exactly what it needed, is it a tier deck now? I don't really think it's that good, right? It's probably still like jank or rogue or whatever you want to call it. But this card is so good for the deck. It's a normal trap that says chart one face-up reptile monster you control and 2 other cards your opponent controls, destroy all 3 targets. So this is basically like Icarus attack, except for reptiles, but it destroys the reptile. So you can use it to trigger things, like offering the Saying Deity, bring in a Phenomenaga after destroying your own Phenomenon. So that is very, very good for the deck. Yeah, I mean, I can't overstate how happy I am that this thing exists now for the deck. It really does make the deck so much more playable, even if so much more playable from the low bar that the Venom deck had is still not really playable, is still something. So I will take it. Next up, we've got Gemini support. But to talk about the Gemini support, I just want to talk about plant support for a bit. Plants have not really been their own thing for up to this point in the game's history. But, one of the best Gemini monsters released in this set, arguably the best Gemini monster released in the set, I would argue that at least, is a card that can actually pair with plants. So I figured I'd talk about Gemini monsters and plants in the same breath here. So Giga Plant is that monster, the level 6 Earth plant. Gemini monster, 24 attack, 1200 defense. Says this card is treated as a normal monster while face up on the field or in the graveyard. While this card is a normal monster on the field, you can normal summon it to have it become an effect monster with this effect. So the typical Gemini thing. I'm not going to read that for the other Gemini monsters in the rest of the video. I'll just refer to this as the Gemini effect. And its Gemini effect is once per turn, you can special summon 1 insect or plant monster from your hand or graveyard. So that is very, very good. Not just for being able to bring out other plants, which we'll get to the plants, but the plants are kind of cracked here, but also for being able to bring out Blazewing Butterfly, which is an insect monster. It's a Gemini monster as well that can be used to bring back other Gemini monsters from your graveyard. So it's very, very good overall. You can also bring out other Giga Plants with this thing, so that's very nice as well. And just use it to just bring out a bunch of monsters on field. So this thing is really, really good. And you can also bring it out very easily with Lone Fire Blossom. This is a level 3 fire plant, 500 attack, 1400 defense. Is 1 per turn. You can treat 1 face-up plant monster, special summon 1 plant monster from your deck. That is pretty insane. Now, plant monsters, there aren't really that many of them at this point in the game's history, so like you're not really going to be able to grab too much in this format. But the fact that you can use this to bring a Giga Plant is really, really good. You use this to bring out another Lone Fire Blossom into another Lone Fire Blossom into the Giga Plant, then use Giga Plant to bring back the Lone Fire Blossom to then tribute it, and then bring out another thing from your deck. Like, it's just so, so good. This card is cracked, and even though it doesn't really have the tools to make it like a crazy, crazy deck in this format, it's definitely very, very good. Now, the other plants that are released in this set are not really that good, but they are something, so I figured I'd mention them here. Regenerating Rose is a level 7 plant. 0 attack, 1500 defense. When this card is destroyed by balance into the graveyard, you're supposed to summon 2 Regenerating Rose tokens, which are level 3 plants, 1200 attack, 1200 defense. I mean, you can use these for tribute summons, so that's something, but Regenerating Rose is unfortunately a level 7 monster, so it's very hard to bring out on its own. You can bring it off Mystic Tomato, I guess, which is the idea of like Mystic Tomato is a plant as well, so you can do stuff with that, but I think overall this thing is just jumping through too many hoops to try and make it work. And so it's not really that good overall. But it's still a cool card. I can definitely see the vision behind it, even if the vision doesn't quite connect. Lastly, we've got Samsara Lotus here. As a plant, 0 attack, 0 defense point monster. So during your end phase, if you control no spell or trap cards, you can summon this card from your graveyard in face-up attack position. This card's controller takes 1000 damage during each of their standby phases. So is that really that good? I would say no. It's kind of like a Words Treeborn Frog because, it's during your end phase, so your opponent can attack over it, and you won't have it around to actually, tribute things over and stuff like that. But this thing actually would eventually become a staple in certain FDK decks, but like right now, it's not really good at all. So I don't think this thing is worth really playing. But it's still cool to have like a recurring thing come back, I guess. It's just, you don't have no way to protect this really. And also you're taking 1000 as well on top of that. But getting back to the Gemini monsters, we actually have some decent Gemini monsters beyond Giga Plant. Of course, Giga Plant is Giga Cracked, but we've got Future Samurai as well. It's got the typical Gemini condition, and then its effect is once per turn, you can banish 1 monster from your graveyard, target 1 face-up monster on the field, destroy that target. So it's basically a free pop a lot of the time. So that's pretty good. Next up, we got Gemini Lancer, which is a 1800 attack, 1400 defense point Sea Serpent. Gemini monster, so it's got this typical Gemini conditions. And Gemini effect is during battle between this attacking card and a monster, its defense lower than the attack of this card, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. So that can come up, can be pretty decent. I will say that these two are some of the better Gemini monsters, I will say. Although Gigaplant, of course, takes the cake. It's the best one up to this point in the game. We also had some Gemini spell drop support, which was not bad overall. We've got Unleash Your Power, the quick clear spell. This is all Gemini monsters that were on your side of the field. When this card was activated, are treated to affect monsters and gain their effects. During the end phase of the turn, set all monsters affected by this card's effect. That'll basically reset the Gemini summon condition. You have to resummon them on a following turn. But the nice thing is that you can just flip these things up if they survive and then normal summon it normally. So, it's not the worst thing. It's better than being returned to hand, which would be like the ultimate worst case scenario, or being destroyed, I guess. But I think this thing is overall pretty decent for the deck. And if you're trying to get like all your Gigaplans online to then do like crazy combos, like your opponent might not be lasting another turn here. So all told, a pretty crazy card. Next up, we've got Gemini Trap Hole, a normal trap that says activate only when a Gemini monster that is treated as an effect monster controlled by battle. Destroy all monsters your opponent controls. So this is really good. It's basically like Mirror Force kind of, but delayed Mirror Force because you do still lose your monster. That being said, I think it's a little bit situational. There are going to be times where you don't really care about activating this thing. And also you kind of want to be keeping your Gemini monsters alive, especially like Gigaplant. If your Gigaplant dies, you could just be Giga dead even if you destroy all your opponent's monsters. So I don't really think this thing is that good. Next up, we got 6am support. 6am only received one new support card in this set, but man, is it a doozy. It's 6 Samurai United is a continuous spell. This is each time a 6 Samurai monster or monsters is normal to special summon, place one Bushido counter on this card, max 2. You send this card to the graveyard, draw one card for each Bushido counter on this card. So that is very, very good. You get to draw deeper into your deck, hopefully draw into a Grandmaster or something like that. And that's super powerful. So I like this card a lot. I think it's very good for the deck. And, I think it's a must play in the deck in the future. Next will be a Glad Beast, another very popular, archetype from this time. I'd say the 6 Sams and Glad Beasts are kind of like my favorite archetypes from this time period. So I'm glad to see them both getting some pretty good support. And the Glad Beast support that's probably the best in the format is Gladiator Beast Darius, the level 4 Beast Warrior, 7-year attack, 300 defense. Says when this card is supposed to summoned by the effective Gladiator Beast monster, you target one Gladiator Beast monster in your graveyard. Supposed to summon that target, but its effect is negated by this card, and it is shuffled back into the deck when this card leaves the field. At the end of the battle phase of this card attack or effect, it has the same Gladiator Beast effect that basically you can shuffle back into the deck, and it's supposed to summon one Gladiator Beast monster from your deck except Darius. So the nice thing about this thing is, well, there's a couple reasons. One, if you're only playing a couple copies of something like Murmillo, right, and that gets sent to grave, you bring back the Murmillo, shovel it back when you shovel back the Darius later, and then have access to it later in the future. 2, this can be used to build into Gladiator Beast fusion monsters. Like right now, the only one really is Heraclinos. That's the only one worth playing. And so this is basically 2 monsters for that. So it's kind of like Secutor in a way, except, it doesn't make it on its own, but it's still pretty good regardless. So I think that Darius is a very good card. Of course, it will get a lot better with the next core set that's released, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Next up, we got Andal. Andal's just a normal monster. It's a 1900 monster. But it's not terrible. It can beat over your opponent's thing, so that's nice. And yeah, it's not the best thing in the world, but sometimes you just want a big guy, so I don't hate this thing. Next up, we got Gladiator Beast Proving Ground, searching out that Andal, of course, the superstar of the deck. And there's a normal spell that says add one level 4 lower Gladiator Beast monster from your deck to your hand, so it's basically Rhoda for Glad Beast, which is very, very good a lot of the time. It can be a bit awkward because, like, with Glad Beast, you don't necessarily want to search them out to hand, you want to search them out from deck. But, if you really need, like, the Laquari to start your combo, or you've got a Test Tiger and no Glad Beast, this can give you a little bit more consistency there. And so I think it's ultimately a pretty good card overall. Next up, we got Gladiator Beast Battle Archfiend Shield. I don't really think this thing is the best. It's an equip spell, and the equip spells, I think, in general, not really that good for Glad Beast, but so the equip only to a Gladiator Beast monster. If the equip monster will be destroyed, destroy this card instead. When this card is sent to your graveyard, because the equip monster you control is shuffled into your deck, return this card to your hand. Now, ideally, you'll probably never be activating that effect, because you're just using this thing to sort of keep your Gladiator Beast alive in battle, to then shovel it back. So this thing is a lot worse than a lot of the other equip spells, in my opinion, because while the other equip spells don't really contribute to the Gladiator Beast game plan as much as this one does, they at least recur in a normal way, whereas Archfiend Shield does not really do that. So I don't really think this thing is that good, but it is a new equip spell, so I figured I'd mention it here. And also it's an Archfiend, which, there actually was another Archfiend support card, which we'll get into right after the Glad Beast. Next, we got Double Tag Team, the normal trap that says activate only when you're supposed to summon a Gladiator Beast monster. It's supposed to summon one level 4 lower Gladiator Beast monster from your hand or deck. So this plus Darius is basically a 1 card, or I guess not 1 card, 2 card Heraclinos. So, that's kind of nice there. And they even have, I think, Laquari on that art there in the background. So you can sort of pair it with that. But unfortunately, it does not trigger the Gladiator Beast monster's effect that you get, when summoned out normally. So this thing is not really the best in my opinion, but it is still fine. It's a fine card overall. And yeah, it's just another way to get Glider Beast out from deck, I guess. So I wouldn't play it personally, but I could definitely see Glider Beast players playing it in some capacity. Next up, we got the Archfiend support card that I mentioned. I don't know why they're supporting such an old archetype, but I will not say no to more Archfiend support. There's a Prison Queen Archfiend, the level 8 Fiend monster, dark, 2600 attack, 700 defense. With 1 per turn during your standby phase, you must pay 1000 life points. This is not optional, or this card is destroyed. 1 per turn during your standby phase, target 1 level 4 lower Fiend monster on the field. That target gains 1000 attack until the end of this turn. Pandemonium must be on the field, and this card must be in your graveyard to activate and resolve this effect. So that's a pretty good card for Archfiends, I think. I mean, Archfiends as a whole are really bad. They've been bad for quite some time. But I'll never say no to support cards coming out to support an archetype. So I think that's neat. And this does fill out the Queen, because we were kind of wondering where the Queen was. I mean, there was Infernal Queen, sure. But like, this is like a Queen that's actually as powerful as the Queen should be. So I like this card a lot. And it sort of is similar to Infernal Queen as well. So it implies some lore details. Maybe this was Infernal Queen who got like banished to the graveyard and now mad or something. I don't know. But it's still a cool card overall. Next up, we've got support for just maybe not archetypes, but other sort of strategy that have been released in the past. Firstly, we've got Chain Summoning, the quick play spell. This sort of slots nicely into the chain mechanic cards that were in Cyberdark Impact. It is a quick play spell that says activate Chain Link 3 or higher. You can select up to 3 normal summon sets this turn, not just one. You not activate this card. Multiple cards with the effect, with the same name or the effect of cards of such cards are already activating that chain. That's just sort of boilerplate for a lot of the cards that do this sort of thing. But the thing is pretty good for a variety of decks. You can use it for something like gadgets if you want to get a bunch of gadgets and keep getting those searches in. That's kind of nice. You can use it for Gemini monsters, actually, to just normal summon a bunch of Gemini monsters and get their effects off as well. So kind of versatile card there. And also, if you've got monsters that actually have effects when they're summoned, they can build up future chains as well. So this thing is not bad overall, but I feel like you wouldn't really play it in the chain deck itself. You just play it in other decks that can actually potentially use it at some point. So neat card overall. Next up, we got Drastic Drop Off. This is mainly for counter fairies, in my opinion. As a great inclusion for counter fairies. There's a counter trap that says when your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, including drawing, they must discard one of the cards. So this is really nice. You could use it for something like a Rhoda or a Stratos to just, pitch whatever your opponent searches out, and that's pretty good for you. Or you can just use it in draw phase. Either way, it's a very flexible counter trap that can be used in a variety of situations. And if you really just want to trigger one of your counter fairy effects, you could just do that in the draw phase and get the effect off right away. So ultimately, I think this thing is really good for the deck. So I like it a lot. Unfortunately, as I mentioned with Vandalgion, I can't pair it with that, but still the counter fairy deck will take any counter trap that's remotely playable, right? Next up, we got Blue Thunder T45. This is in the sort of spaceship series of monsters. It's a level 4 machine, 1700 attack, 1000 defense. So if this card is destroyed an opponent's monster by battle, it's also summon 1 Thunder option token machine, a light, level 4, 1500 attack, 1500 defense, and then this token cannot be traded for a tribute summon. But it's sort of in that series of cards, so I figured I'd mention it here. Doesn't really synergize the most with those cards, I will say. But I think the spaceships are sort of a cool series of cards, and they will receive a powerful piece of support that might make them somewhat playable in the next set. So we'll have to dive into that when we dive into the format after Dad Return. But that will do it for all these sort of old support cards that were added in Phantom Darkness. Let's dive into the meat and potatoes of this video and go over what makes Phantom Darkness one of the most game-breaking sets in the game's history. Okay, no more slow rolling. We're finally going to dive in to what makes Phantom Darkness so cracked. And the big thing that makes it cracked is Dark Arm Dragon. Now, Dark Arm Dragon is not alone in being a powerful Dark Boss monster that's very easy to summon out. It's actually a part of a series of monsters like that, which we will also go into in depth in this section. But Dark Arm Dragon is unique because it is just insanely cracked. It's the most cracked of any of them. It just does so much for you with very little restrictions on when you can play it. And it's just so good. Now, the one restriction that you might have on it is that it cannot be normal summon or set, and it must be spell summoned from your hand by having exactly 3 dark monsters in your graveyard. So if you're playing a dark deck that's trying to get darks in your grave, if you go over 3, you can't bring out Dark Arm Dragon anymore unless you find a way to reduce the number of darks in your grave. But in practice, that's a very easy condition to meet. It's 2000 attack, so big guy when you bring it out. And then you can banish 1 dark monster from your graveyard, then target 1 card on the field, destroy that target. So after you bring it out, you can pop your opponent's stuff and get in for a ton of damage. What makes this even worse is that if you have 3 copies of the thing in hand and you got 3 darks in grave exactly, you can bring them all out. Yeah, there's not really anything where it's like, oh, you have to like banish a card when summoned, so that way you can't just bring out another Dark Arm Dragon immediately after. No, you just bring out 3 Dark Arm Dragons in 1 turn, as long as you have exactly 3 darks in grave. That is absolutely nuts. That is crazy. That's crazy. I don't know what they were thinking with this. Why'd they leave this thing unlimited? Well, I kind of know why. I think it was probably for monetary reasons, because this thing quickly became one of the most sought after cards from the set as a secret rare. And it turned into a format that like a lot of people were priced out of. And that's very, very unfortunate that that happened. But that was just one of the many reasons why the game sort of broke at this stage. But anyways, Dark Arm Dragon, as I mentioned, is not alone in being dark monsters that, sort of pair together and do some crazy stuff. Let's go over the other dark boss monsters now before we get into the things that support these things and make them easier to summon out. Dark Nephthys is probably the next easiest to summon. It's a 2400 attack, 1600 defense point monster. It says if you have 3 or more dark monsters in your graveyard and this card in your hand, you can banish 2 of them from your graveyard, send this card from your hand to the graveyard. Then during your next standby phase, after this card was sent to the graveyard by this card effect, spell summon this card from your graveyard. And then when this card is spell summoned, target 1 spell trap on the field, destroy that target. So as you can sort of see from Nephthys and from Dark Arm Dragon, they're both plays on classic Yu-Gi-Oh monsters, Yu-Gi-Oh boss monsters specifically here. And they both do something similar to their original card's effect. Nephthys pops a spell trap, just like the original Nephthys would pop all spell traps on field. And Dark Arm Dragon can pop a card, just like how regular Arm Dragons could pop monsters, right? Dark Arm Dragon definitely gets the bigger upgrade of the two, but still you can see the vision there. Nice thing about Nephthys is that it's not exactly 3. You can just have 3 or more, so that makes it a bit easier to summon out there. But it does require you to banish 2 of them from grave, so that can potentially diminish you below the 3 that you need to bring this thing out. So it is a way to sort of regulate your graveyard's amount of darks, though, so that is nice for if you're playing a dark deck that's going all in on this, and you're a bit worried about whether you can actually bring out Dark Arm Dragon. By playing Nephthys, you have a way to get down your graveyard a little bit more, although this will also play itself in graveyard, so it's only really reducing by 1 dark monster initially. But you definitely see the vision of like why they're playing this thing or why they made this thing, because basically the way to sort of fix the amount of darks in grave to go for Dark Arm Dragon. I think the sort of idea behind these cards is basically Dark Arm Dragon's kind of the main goal. It's the best of them, but you're using the other cards to modulate your graveyard to actually get into Dark Arm Dragon, because, if you're trying to get a bunch of darks in grave, you'll probably end up with more than 3 darks in grave at some point. And so you need a way to sort of regulate that, and the other boss monsters do that as well. So it's kind of neat. In theory, I like the theory of it, but unfortunately in practice, it's much easier to get 3 darks exactly in grave for Dark Arm Dragon than you expect. And so in practice, you don't really need the Nephthys or any of the other cards that I'm going to mention here. But it is still cool to actually go over it and see where the vision was. Dark Creator is a level 8 Dark Thunder, 23 attack, 3,000 defense. Just like with Dark Arm Dragon, it cannot be normal summoned or sent. It must first be spell summoned from your hand by having 5 or more dark monsters in your graveyard while you control no monsters. Now, because it says must first be spell summoned, it means that this can be brought back from grave, which actually can be important. Unlike Dark Arm Dragon, which cannot be brought back from grave or from banish pile or from anywhere. It can only be summoned from hand with its own effect. But Dark Creator, you bring it out by having 5 or more darks in grave, and then once per turn, you can banish 1 dark monster from your graveyard to target 1 dark monster in your graveyard to spell summon that target. So this thing basically brings out, a monster from grave and also banishes the monster from grave. So you're basically diminishing your dark count in grave by 2. So just like with Nephthys, you're sort of regulating your graveyard to get into Dark Arm Dragon a lot more easily. And this thing just bring back dark monsters from grave is honestly a good effect on its own, especially if you're playing a lot of these dark boss monsters here that can actually be spelled from graveyard. So I definitely see the vision there as well. And of course, it'll play off the regular creator, which can also summon cards from grave. Next up, we had Rainbow Dark Dragon. This is probably, I would say, maybe one of the worst of the boss monsters. Maybe not the worst, but this is the Rainbow Dark Dragon card that I mentioned earlier, and also it's always treated as ultimate crystal, so you can need it for Rainbow Neos as well. And this thing's 4,000 attack, 0 defense. It cannot be normal summon or set. Must be spell summoned from your hand by banishing 7 dark monsters with different names from your graveyard. You can banish all other dark monsters from your field or graveyard. This card gains 500 attack for each card banished this place. So this is sort of the extreme of Creator and Nephthys here, where like you need 7 in grave, and also you need to banish them, and they have to all have different names. So it is probably the most restrictive of them, and honestly, for being the most restrictive, that's the worst effect. It's just an attack boost on an already buffed out card. So this thing is not really that good. So I don't really think you should play it in this style of deck. But I definitely see like what they were going for here as well. And again, playing off Rainbow Dragon, which is an iconic card that came from early in the game's history. Although in the case of Rainbow Dragon, it's probably the newest of these cards. Next up, we got Dark Lord Zerato. This is a level 8 fairy, 28 attack, 23 in defense. And this thing is not actually special summoned. So I wanted to go over the ones that all special summon themselves first, because I'd say that these things are probably more accessible just in terms of not needing a normal summon. But I will say Zerato is probably more accessible than Rainbow Dark Dragon either way, because you just need to have 4 or more dark monsters with different names in your graveyard. And then you can tribute summon this card by treating 1 dark monster. So a lot easier to pull off than Raven Dark Dragon, in my opinion. And then you can send one dark monster from your hand to the graveyard, destroy all monsters your opponent controls. Once per turn during the end phase, if this effect was activated this turn, destroy this card. But the thing is that a lot of the times when you're using this effect, you're probably going to end the game that turn, right? You've got 2800 attack from this thing. You're probably bringing out other dark boss monsters as well, and you're just going to go ham and kill your opponent that turn. So this thing is often played in some dad return decks as like a one of. There are ways to cheat it out with like banishing it and then bring it back. And then you're going to pop the field and then just attack him with everything. So, yeah, this thing does see play. It's definitely not really the best of these, though, in my opinion, in terms of, like, what it does for the theme itself. It's sort of just played as a, monster that you can cheat out and then get its effect off, which does see some purpose and, makes sense why people play it. But, I would say that for the theme itself, it's not really the best. Next up, we got Dark Knight Powershot. This is a level 5 fairy, 19 attack, 14 defense. If this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can banish one dark monster from your graveyard and then draw one card. This card gains 1 attack for each dark monster in your graveyard. So that's a very interesting play off Air Knight Powershot. Probably not powerful enough to actually see much play here. But the fact that you do get to draw deeper in your deck, while also modulating your graveyard's dark, is very, very nice here. But just like with Zerato, you do have to tribute this thing out directly, so I'd say it's not really the best in that capacity. Next up, we get Dark Horus, a level 8 dragon, 3,000 attack, 1,800 defense. It says 1 per turn after resolving a spell card that was activated during your opponent's main phase. You can turn 1 level 4 dark monster in your graveyard. Spell summon that target. This card must be face up on the field to activate and resolve this effect. I'd say this is probably the case here that is probably the strongest for like a monster that is the strictest downgrade from its original incarnation, right? The original Horus could negate all spells, and that was absolutely nuts. You could just shut down your opponent's game plan, what they're trying to do. With Dark Horus, it just brings back a monster from your grave in a very restrictive way at that. So this thing is not really the best. It's got 3,000 attacks, so that's something. It's a dragon, so Dragon decks could play this potentially, but I think overall this thing is not really that good. Next up, we've got Belial, Marquis of Darkness, and this thing is kind of in a similar boat to Horus, where like it doesn't really rely on having a bunch of darks in grave to actually bring this thing out, although I guess you could say the same boat of Parshath as well. I think they're both 2 tribute monsters, and they're just big dark monsters, so I figured I'd mention them here. This is 2800 attack, 2400 defense. It says your opponent cannot target any face-up monster you control except Belial, Marquis of Darkness, for an attack or with spell trap effects. So you bring this thing out as a way to protect things like your Dark Arm Dragon or stuff like that. But realistically, it's kind of just a win more card. Like if you bring out Dark Arm Dragon, you're popping your opponent's back row and stuff like that anyways. So it realistically doesn't matter all too much. So I think this thing is not really the best, but it is something that you can play if you want another big dark monster to bring out. And speaking of other big dark monsters to bring out, there are some more on top of this. But we're shifting away further and further from the sort of dark theming. Belial's honestly just included in that because it had darkness in the name. We're moving more into just dark monsters that are just generically boss monsters, right? Legendary Fiend is one of them. This is actually from the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. They finally brought it in here. Level 6 Fiend, 1500 attack, 800 defense, says 1 per turn during your standby phase. This card gains 700 attack. So if you let this thing get out of control, it can go up to major heights. But compared to some of the other boss monsters that we've seen here, it's not really that good. Next up, we got Dark Red Enchanter, level 6 Dark Spellcaster, 700 attack, 20 defense. Says if this card normal summon, place 2 spell counters on it. Each time a spell card is activated, place 1 spell counter on this card. When that spell resolves, gain 300 attack for each spell counter on it. Once per turn, you can remove 2 spell counters from this card, discard 1 random card from your opponent's hand. So this thing can potentially hand loop your opponent. So that's kind of a cool thing here that you can do with it. Also, even if you're not hand looping, it's 2300 attack at base and then goes up higher than that. So I'd say the thing is basically just better than Legendary Fiend in pretty much every way. But it's still a very cool card overall. And I mean, you could argue that because maybe you don't like the hand looping aspect of it. That's fair. But the fact that it's a normal summon and then you can potentially use it as a Thestalos if you want to, it's kind of nice. So I like this card overall. I think it's probably one of the better ones of the 1 tribute dark monsters here that we're featuring. Next up, Vampire's Curse, the level 6 dark zombie, 2000 attack, 800 defense. Says when this card is destroyed by balance of the graveyard, pay 500 life points, special summon during the next standby phase of the next turn, that is. If you do, it gains 500 attack, so that's kind of neat. It goes up to 2500. You'd think it would just keep gaining 500 attack each time, but it just becomes 2500, because when it's destroyed, it forgets that it gained the 500, and then you bring it back, and it gains 500, just bringing it up to 2500 again. So it's not as impressive as you might think. Still, the thing is not terrible. It's kind of like Vampire Lord. It's sort of a throwback to that, except it gets an effect upon being destroyed by battle instead of card effect. But frankly, it's just not the best thing overall. There are better things that you could be playing, especially because, Dark Arm Dragon, things like that don't care about battle. They're just going to pop your stuff and then get in for a ton of damage. So this thing is not really that good. But the last set of dark boss monsters in this set were actually the cover cards for this set, and that's the Yubel monsters here. These were majorly important in the anime, and they're a very interesting class of cards. Their Yubel is the base of them. There's a level 10 Fiend. 0 attack, 0 defense, cannot be destroyed by battle, and then you take no battle damage from battles involving this card. Before damage calculation, if this card is in face-up attack position and targeted for an attack, you get to inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attacking monster's attack. And then once per turn during your end phase, tribute one other monster or destroy this card. When this card is destroyed, except by its own effect, its owner can spell summon one Yubel Terror Incarnate from their hand, deck, or graveyard. So it's definitely an interesting card. Your opponent can just not attack into it if they want to. So, it's not the best card in the world. And also, the fact that you have to tribute another monster every turn or destroy it is kind of awkward. But if you can actually destroy this to, get its effect off to bring out the Yubel Terror Incarnate, you get a little bit of a better boss monster here. Yubel Terror Incarnate is a level 11 Fiend, 0 attack, 0 defense. So once cannot be normal summoner set, must be spell summoned by Yubel, cannot be destroyed by battle. You take no battle damage from battles involving this card. And then before damage calculation, if this face-up attack card is targeted for an attack, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attacking monster's attack. Once per turn during your end phase, destroy all other monsters on the field. When this card leaves the field, you spell summon one Yubel, the Ultimate Nightmare, from your hand, deck, or graveyard. So this thing's a little bit better than Yubel because while you are losing any other monster on the field with it, your opponent's also losing their monsters on the field with it. So that's a pretty neat sort of effect there. A bit better than Yubel. And also, it's not like a maintenance cost, right? Like, it's not destroyed if nothing else is destroyed. It just sticks around on field and is annoying for your opponent to deal with. So, it's definitely better than Yubel. But now let's get into Yubel, the Ultimate Nightmare, the ultimate boss monster of this sort of series of cards. Level 12, the cover card of this set. 0 attack, 0 defense, and cannot be destroyed by battle. Must be spell summoned by Yubel Terror Incarnate. Take no battle damage from battles involving this card at the end of the damage step. If this face-up attack position monster battle an opponent's monster, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that opponent's monster attack. Also destroy that monster. So this thing here, you can actually get aggressive with it, attack into your opponent's stuff, and then also destroy that stuff after it's attacked in. So that's pretty cool. The downside of this, of course, is that, if you're attacking in with this, then your opponent can use things like Dimpriz or Sakuretsu Armor or things like that to actually clear this thing, and this does not special summon out another thing after it's, destroyed. But it's still pretty cool. I like this sort of series of monsters very much. Like, I think it's a very interesting sort of idea there. And there are ways that you can sort of use to get your opponent either to attack or to destroy these things. The one that you might be thinking of is Hate Buster, which also came out in this set. There's a normal trap that says, when a Fiend type monster you control is targeted for an attack, target the opponent's attacking monster and that monster you control, destroy both targets, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the original attack of the opponent's destroyed monster. So you might think, oh, that's an easy way to get out the other Yubel cards. However, this thing will cause the Yubel and Yubel, Terror Incarnate to actually miss timing, because it's a when you can effect, and this thing actually deals damage after, it's destroyed those targets. So, yeah, that's kind of bad design, I think, here. I'm pretty sure it misses timing, at least. You can let me know if it doesn't miss timing, but I'm pretty sure it does, and that is very, very unfortunate, because that would be actually a pretty good card in this strategy, but that's how it goes sometimes. And luckily, there are other better cards for this strategy, I guess, as well. We got all out attacks, the continuous trap that says, if a monster is supposed to summon while this card is face up on the field, change that monster to attack position and must attack if able during the turn they are supposed to summon. So basically, you can use your opponent's monsters to actually, attack into your stuff here. And this is actually a potential use for the Destiny Hero Departed that we mentioned earlier, by giving your opponent that, and then using all out attacks to force it to attack into your Bell. You get to pop that and potentially deal 1,000 damage. But frankly, it's just not really that good. I think overall, it's kind of tough to maneuver your opponent into being able to actually bring out monsters then attacking your bells, but it's something at least. Next up, we got Call of the Earthbound, the normal trap that says, when an opponent's monster declared an attack, you choose the target of the attack. So the idea here is that potentially, you've got another monster on field and your opponent's like, well, I can't attack into you bell, but I can attack into that other monster. You do Call of the Earthbound, have them attack you bell, and take a damage. So that's something that you can also use there. But frankly, these cards, not really the best here overall, but you can also use them in other ways, right? Like, you can force your opponent to attack into other things. There's some interesting trap monsters that can actually pair with that. Zoma the Spirits 1, continuous trap. This is supposed to summon this card in defense position, add an effect monster. Zombie, dark, level 4, 1800 attack, defense 500. Still treated as a trap as well. And then if this card is special summoned this way and is destroyed by battle, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of the monster that destroyed it. So this is kind of like what you're doing with the Yubel card, except just into a trap monster. But this has more utility than just a Yubel card, because you can actually bring it out during your opponent's end phase, switch to attack during your turn, and hack in with it, or tribute it for a monster that you have. So all things considered, I think this thing is pretty good. We've also got Metal Reflect Slime, which is just a 3,000 defense point wall when it's special summoned as a trap monster there. And then if summoned this way, it cannot actually attack, but you're not going to be attacking with it because it's got 0 attack. The only way you'd be attacking with it is if you're doing shield and sword stuff, but frankly, shield and sword is not really that good. So you're just really going to use this as a wall. Maybe you tribute it for something, and it's pretty cool overall. So if your opponent has to attack into it every turn, then they're basically forced to just take a bunch of damage every turn when they tag in. So I think this card is pretty cool. It also pairs with the Calculator in a very cool way. Calculator is a level 2 Thunder Light question mark attack 0 defense. So the attack of this card is the combined levels of all face-up monsters you control time 300. So Metal Reflect Slime is a level 10, which means that you can bring this thing out, buff this thing up to a grand total of 3,600. You can also pair this with the Ubel monsters as well because they're also very high level. And just have a huge beat stick on your side of the field. So that's pretty nice. Now, getting into some of the worst applications of this style of play, we've also got Vengeful Shinobi, the level 2 Dark Warrior. 4 attack, 800 defense, said when this face-up attack position card target for attack, draw 1 card. So you could potentially use like Call of the Earthbound or, all attacks to force your opponent attacking into Vengeful Shinobi. And then you get the draws there. Frankly, it's not really that good, but, listen, I got to distract myself with the jank stuff in this set to sort of distract myself from the tier 0 meta stuff that's going to be coming from both Dark Arm Dragon here and the sort of enablers for Dark Arm Dragon that I'll discuss later. So please let me have this Isle of Jank in this sort of sea of darkness, right? Give me that at least. Next up, we got Mirage Tube. This is a quick play spell that says this card cannot be activated from hand, although I'm not sure how you would be able to activate from hand. It says activate only when a face-up monster you control is selected as an attack target, inflict 1,000 damage to your opponent. So you can also use this in combination with the other stuff to burn your opponent for even more. So that's kind of neat. And if you want more, ways to sort of utilize, things attacking into your stuff and then getting value out of it, you've got Sinister Seeds, a normal trap that says when a monster you control is destroyed in a battle in which you took damage and it was face-up attack at the start of the damage step and when it was destroyed, special summon 1 Sinister Seed token, plant 100 attack, 100 defense, level 1, and then for every 500 battle damage, the 500 points of battle damage you took, you can see how much this video is already wearing on me. The darkness is getting to me. But yeah, so basically sending out a bunch of tokens. I could include this in the section where I talked about the plant support, but frankly, this feels more in line with what's going on here with like getting your opponent to attack into your stuff and getting tokens out of it. You can also use Rainbow Life if you don't want to pair with Sinister Seeds. This is a trap card that says discard 1 card. Until the end of this turn, anytime you take damage, gain that amount of life points instead. So you could potentially use it with Vengeful Shinobi, so that way you're not taking damage, you're just drawing cards. Although, to be fair, that's sort of just go net neutral in terms of what you're gaining off the Shinobi, because you draw a card, pitch a card, and you're also using up the Shinobi and the Rainbow Life, so you're actually going kind of -2 here overall. But it's still something, I guess. It's just really bad. I mean, the card is getting worse for this strategy, so like, let's just keep pushing through them. Maybe after diving into the depths of how bad the card in this set can be, I'll be more suited to face the height of how good the card in this set can be. Alchemy Cycle's next. A normal trap that said the original attack of all face-up monsters you control becomes 0 until the end phase. Each time a monster that had its original attack reduced to 0 by this effect is destroyed by battle. Instead of the graveyard, draw 1 card. So this is kind of similar to Vengeful Shinobi. You potentially get 2 draws off of it, or you could potentially use Sinister Seeds and force your opponent to attack into all of them. Alchemy Cycle to then draw a bunch of cards. So the ideal thing here would be if your opponent summons out Chimera Tech Over Dragon, you flip out All Out Attack, Rainbow Life, Sinister Seeds, and Alchemy Cycle there just to combo for a ton of draws and, gaining a bunch of life points after you Sinister Seed to suffer the damage there, and then Rainbow Life to gain the remaining damage that you get. I don't know, man. It's just tough. I'm trying to desperately combo craft here, but it is not. These cards are just not good. Ugh. We're almost to the end of them, though. Vicious Claw is an equipped spell that said the equipped monster gains 300 attack. If the equipped monster would be destroyed in a battle, return this card to its owner's hand instead. Then destroy 1 monster, except the one that battled the equipped monster. Inflict 600 damage to your opponent. After that, spell summon 1 evil token, Fiend, Dark level 7, attack 2,500, defense 2,500 on your opponent's side of the field. During this turn, this card is returned to your hand. You cannot use Vicious Claw from your hand. So the idea here being is that, like, your opponent can attack into one of your things. Vicious Claw, destroy the monster from their side of the field, give them another monster to attack into one of your things again. And if you're using it with things like you actually want to be attacked into, then it can actually pair very well with that. But frankly, this thing is just way too situational. Your opponent is going to be hard pressed to actually attack into it and like do stuff with it, knowing what it will do. And if they do attack into it, they probably want the evil token there for their own nefarious purposes. So I don't really think this thing is that good. Next up, we got Rainbow Veil, kind of like Rainbow Life. You can use it in these battle sort of things because if the equipped monster battles an opponent's monster while that monster is on the field, its effect is negated during the battle phase only. So you get to negate the effect of an opponent's monster. So you can use this to counter the Yubel stuff. You equip this to one of your monsters attacking to a Yubel. That monster's effect is negated. So you manage to get over the Yubel and be happy about that. So, and I believe this is only, it might just be when destroyed by card effect. I don't actually know. It's just when it's destroyed in general. So I think the Rainbow Veil would still negate it. No, just on field. So you can destroy it. It'll get its effect in your grave. I guess they'll get another Yubel. So that's a bit awkward there, but you can still get over one of their things and deal a bunch of damage potentially as well. So yeah, I mean, that's going to do it for this bleak section of the video, diving into some of the worst cards in this set. I don't know how they thought that releasing these cards would compete with some of the other cards here. But as I mentioned earlier, they did release some other non-dark stuff that is pretty good for their respective strategies. So I can't be too hard in the worst section of the video. But yeah, let's dive into the other cards to support the dark stuff, because that was a bit of a detour. I wanted to refresh myself a bit, but now we're diving into what makes the dark deck so good. And Dark Grepher is a key component of this. This was a TCG exclusive card. Level 4 Warrior, 1700 attack, 1600 defense. So you can spell summon this card from your hand by discarding one level 5 or higher dark monster. One per turn, you can discard one dark monster, send one dark monster from your deck to the graveyard. That is insanely good. That is really, really good. If you're playing a bunch of dark boss monsters like this, you can pitch it to Grepher and then get more value off it. If you don't just want to tribute Grepher for another thing, you can use this to modulate the amount of darks in grave by getting a bunch of darks in grave very quickly. The thing is just really, really good. It's also a warrior, so you can search it off Rhoda. I mean, I could just go on and on and on about how good this thing is, but you'll be seeing it in the duels they'll be releasing for this format on the channel. So you can just watch it do its work there, because this thing is incredibly, incredibly strong. Next up, we got Armageddon Knight, level 4 Dark Warrior, 1400 attack, 1200 defense. When this card is summoned, you can send one dark monster from your deck to your graveyard. So this is kind of like a weaker version of Dark Grepher, in my opinion, but it does require you to have less cards in hand to actually use its effect, so that is a nice thing there. But Dark Grepher is generally going to be the thing that is much, much better than Armageddon Knight. Next up, we got Dark Crusader. This is very similar to Grepher as well. Level 4 Warrior Dark, 1600 attack, 200 defense. It says you can send one dark monster from your hand to the graveyard. This card gains 400 attack. So this card kind of uses the sort of effect of Grepher to pitch cards from hand to grave to get more darks in grave, but this thing uses it to boost its own attack. I think in a world where Grepher did not exist, this could be a potentially good card, but unfortunately you're losing a lot of cards in the process of actually doing this thing, so you need to have a very specific hand to actually make this thing more worth playing than some of the other monsters here. So I don't think this thing is that good, although it's definitely a cool card if you want to play it. Next up, we got Doomsday Horror, the level 4 Dark Fiend. Question mark attack, question mark defense. It said this card's attack and defense are equal to the number of banished dark monsters times 300. And then if this card is destroyed instead of the graveyard, return all banished dark monsters to the graveyard. So this is a way to sort of recycle your own dark monsters that have been banished through something like dad effects and stuff like that. You can also mess up your opponent's dark count if you return all their dark monsters from their banished zone to the graveyard. So maybe you bring this in as sort of an anti-meta strategy there. But, you know, if your opponent banishing a dark monster, this thing also just gets up to a high height as well. So you could just use it for its base attack. So this thing is kind of neat. I wonder if you'll see side deck play in certain decks that actually do want to sort of mess up your opponent's graveyard count. That'll remain to be seen. Either way, very, very cool card in general. Next up, we've got Obsidian Dragon, the level 4 Dark Rock, 800 attack, 2100 defense, and negate any spell trap effect that target exactly one dark monster you control and other cards, and if you do destroy them. This card might have seen play if there wasn't just a strictly better card in the set as well, which is Dark Illusion, the counter trap that says when a spell trap or monster effect is activated, that targets a dark monster on the field, negate the activation if you do destroy that card. So this thing is better because it doesn't cost a normal summon. So, you know, it's just a good counter trap if you do want negation like that. Next up, we got Metabo Globster. I don't know why they made this card. This card's kind of silly, but it could potentially see play in the dark deck if you want to. It's 800 attack, 300 defense. It's a fiend. When you tribute this card for the tribute summon of a dark monster, spell summon 3 Metabo tokens, which are fiend tokens with 0 attack, 0 defense in defense position. These tokens cannot be tributed for a tribute summon. So, unfortunately, they can't be tributed for a tribute summon, but they can still be tributed for something like a plasma summon, the Destiny Hero Plasma, that is, or a Destiny Hero Dogma, or something like that. So you can still use them in various ways. You can also use them to treat for other things. But unfortunately, just like with Obsidian Dragon, there just is a strictly better card in this format, in this actual set that was released, that kind of makes this thing irrelevant, which is Fires of Doomsday. It's a quick play spell. It says, spell summon 2 Doomsday tokens, Fiend Dark, level 1 attack, 0 defense. and defense position. They cannot be tributed for a tribute summon unless it's for a dark monster. You cannot summon other monsters this turn you activate this effect, but you can normal set. So the reason why these are strictly better than Metabo Globster is that essentially, they both require the same amount of turns to actually set up, right? You need to actually bring out Metabo Globster first, and just like you need to activate Fire Doomday on a previous turn, then Metabo Globster. But Fire Doomday is much more flexible. First, it's chainable back row, so you can potentially use it to protect yourself on your opponent's turn, especially if they're using back row removal there. Secondly, you can just use this in your end phase to bring out, or not in your end phase, but your opponent's end phase to bring out the token to then tribute on your turn. So I would say that it's much more likely that you'll get a Doomsday token on your side of the field on your turn to tribute for than the Metabo Globster will be around, because the things just be attacked over by your opponent's stuff. So Globster is not really good enough. I think Doomsday is a lot better. But there are some other ways to tribute the tokens, namely Shadow Priestess of Ohm is a really good one. Level 4 Dark Spellcaster, 1700 attack, 1600 defenses. You can treat one face-up dark monster control to inflict 800 damage to your opponent. Now, back in the day, this would be used for Shadow Priestess FTK stuff. Basically, what you do is you tribute a Democ, Dimfuse it back, bring back Dimfuse, tribute the Democ, Dimfuse it back, etc., with spell economics on field, obviously, to stop you from paying the 2,000 life points there. But this would contribute to FTKs back in the day. I think nowadays people generally don't use the Shadow Priest of Ohm for those sort of FTKs. They use like Toon Cannon Soldier instead. Just a better card in general, really. But you could potentially use this if you want to. And Cannon Soldier Mark II is another card you could potentially use with that. Although this thing is an Earth, it's also a Tribute Monster being level 5. And it's 1900 attack, so it's slightly better than Ohm, but it's not anything to speak of really in terms of attack stats. And the benefit of this is that, like, you can tribute 2 monsters to inflict 1500 damage to your opponent. So slightly better burn damage than something like an Ohm. Actually, no, that's not true, because Ohm would deal 1600 if it tributed 2. So actually, this thing is worse than Ohm, only slightly better than Amazon's Archer as well. It is better than the original Cannon Soldier, so that's something, but frankly, it being a tribute summon monster, not really worth considering here. So this thing is not really that good, but you could potentially use it as well. You could also use Castle Gate as well as a level 6 Earth monster. We're just upping the levels here while getting progressively worse. This is a rock, 0 attack, 24 defense. Says this card cannot be destroyed by battle once per turn. If this card in face-up attack position, you can tribute 1 level 5 or lower monster and to inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster riddle attack. So that could potentially be a big amount of damage, but because it's original attack, that really does limit the amount of damage you can do with this thing. And you're taking every damage every turn that this thing is an attack, and then your opponent's attacking into. So I don't really think this thing is that good, but it's something you could play if you want to. And speaking of burn, since we're on the topic, we might as well talk about Fire Trooper here. It's a level 3 Fire Warrior, 1000 attack, 1000 defense. Said when this card is summoned, you can send to the graveyard to inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. Of course, burn is a bit of a risky strategy in this format because Prime Material Dragon does now exist. It's a level 6 Light Dragon, 24 attack, 2000 defense. Says any effect that would inflict damage to a player increases their life points by the same amount instead. During either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated that would destroy a monster or monsters on field, you can summon 1 card from your hand to the graveyard and negate the activation if you do destroy it. So the second part of this monster's effect is why it's mainly played, because it's got a decent attack stat, and also it prevents itself from being destroyed, and it prevents a lot of things from being destroyed as well. But the burn effect can come up, so it is good to know that this thing is out there as a side deck tech if you do want another way to deal with burn decks. But I don't think it's the best way to do that, but it is a way to do that, so it's something to potentially consider there. But of course, there are other ways to tribute things, probably for a bit of a better payout than just these jank burn cards. Again, I need my little oases of jank in this sea of just overwhelming dominance here. But you can also tribute the tokens or the Metabo Globster tokens as well for Dark Spirit, Dark Greed, a normal strat that says tribute 1 dark monster, draw 2 cards. Your opponent can negate this effect though by revealing 1 spell card in their hand. So that last part of the effect is mainly why this thing will probably not see play. If your opponent does have a spell, they don't even have to discard it. They just have to reveal it, which you don't really care about that much. So I would say this thing is not really worth playing, but it is one of many cards in this set that actually allow you to draw cards based on doing something with a dark monster. Allure of Darkness is the best of these. This is another TCG exclusive, so they're really pushing this thing in the TCG. And this says draw 2 cards, then banish 1 dark monster from your hand, or if you do not have any in your hand, send your entire hand to the graveyard. Now, that second part of the effect can come up, but it will very rarely come up because it will only really come up if you're blind alluring out of desperation. You just set the other cards in your hand, activate allure, hope to draw into a dark monster, and if you don't, you lose your hand, but you're probably losing anyways if you didn't activate allure. So this card's very good. It both draws you deeper into your deck. It also sets up other plays. Like if you banish a Democ from your hand with this thing and then bring it back with Dimfuse, that's very, very powerful. Or bring it back with Return as well, because the namesake deck in the format does play Return from the different dimension. And this thing just sets up so much. It's so good. Yeah, I don't know why they made this. I don't know why they thought this was okay, but I do know why they made it. They made it to push this strategy even further, but they really did not need to. And there are some other like sort of draw cards in the deck, like the beginning and the end. This is sort of similar to Dark Rainbow Dragon, where it's like, you know, not really the best thing that you could be doing with your dark monsters. This is a normal spell that says if you have 7 or more dark monsters in your graveyard, banish 5 dark monsters from your graveyard and then draw 3 cards. So this draws you more than Allure does, but also removes a lot of your graveyard setup. So is it the best? Maybe not, but it does modulate your graveyard as well. So if you're playing a really dark heavy deck that's sending a ton of cards to grave, maybe you want to play this thing. But I think overall, this is not really the best in the sort of main version of the deck that you'd be playing. Escape from the different dimension, or escape from the dark dimension. I keep getting this mixed up with return from the different dimension because that card is very, very good in this format, and we'll get into why later. But escape from the dark dimension is sort of a worse version of that. It's a continuous trap that says target one of your banished dark monsters, spell summon that target. When this card leaves the field, destroy that target. And if you do, banish it. When that target is destroyed, destroy this card. So that's pretty good. You know, it gets you back one of your banished dark monsters. If you set that up with something like Allure, then you can sort of combo off with that. So this thing, while not as powerful as something like Return, obviously, it's still very good and could potentially see play as another card in these decks. Finally, the last of these new dark support cards is Dark Eruption. This is a normal spell that says target one dark monster with 1500 or less attack in your graveyard, add that target to your hand. So this is another way to modulate the amount of darks in your graveyard. You can add back a dark that you might want to get back, like, you know, something like Armageddon Knight potentially, you know, to your hand. And so that can be pretty good. You can also get back Sangan, DD Crow, etc. There's a lot of good targets for this thing, although it might be a bit low impact compared to some of the other cards here, so it might not really see the most play. But that finally does it for the dark support here. Oh, man, this is just so crazy that they thought that this would be okay. Maybe some of the other cards left here can just combat this dark threat. Maybe there's something, anything here that can help here. Okay, it seems like they released some Earth support and some Wind support. Maybe this can do it. Earth Effigy, an Earth Monster, Rock, 100 attack, 2000 defense. It said this card can be treated as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of an Earth normal monster. That I don't really see how that's useful. I don't see how that will help. Normal monsters are not really the best. So yeah, that seems bad. Okay, Wind Effigy, maybe this thing can save us here. Wind Effigy, level 4, Wing Beast, Wind, 1800 attack, 200 defense. This card can be treated as the tribute. Oh my goodness, I can't even get through this. It's so mind-racking. This card can be treated as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of a Wind normal monster. Are there any 2 tribute Wind normal monsters in the game right now? I think the answer to that question is no. I don't know why they printed this here. I guess they were printing it because there are other cards like Dark Effigy and I think Light Effigy that came out earlier because that do similar things. But like I don't know. That just seems pretty bad. Okay, well, the attribute support doesn't help us here. Maybe the type specific support will help. Goblin Zombie. Okay. It seems like good zombie support. Zombies can be decent. Dark level 4 zombie, 1100 attack, 1050 defense. So if this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, send the top card of their deck to the graveyard. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, add 1 zombie monster with 1200 or less defense from your deck to your hand. Okay, that actually seems like great support. But this is dark. Oh no. This could actually be used in dark decks. Oh, that's a bit rough, but it's still very, very good zombie support. Okay, maybe something can be done with zombies. I don't know. I'll try and tinker with it, but no promises there. Okay, so zombies, maybe something. Doesn't seem like much, but maybe. What's the next type we got on our list? Fish? Fish? Okay, I guess we're rolling with it. Super Ancient Deep Sea King Coelacanth, level 7 fish, 2000 attack, 2000 defense. Says 1 per turn, you can discard 1 card, special summon as many level 4 or lower fish monsters as possible from your deck, but they cannot declare an attack, and their effects are negated. When a card or effect is activated, target this card on the field. Quick effect, you can tribute 1 other fish monster, negate the effect, and if you do, destroy that card. Okay, this is actually a pretty good boss monster. Okay, hold it. Okay, maybe there's something we can do with this. What other fish are legal at this time? Oh, like nothing? Okay, maybe it's not really the best boss monster in the world. Yeah, that's a bit awkward. Maybe when better fish come out, maybe this thing will see more play, but as is right now, it's not really the best. I mean, they did release some other fish cards here. Golden Flying Fish, the level 4, 1700 attack, 1000 defense point fish. So you can tribute 1 other fish type monster, then target 1 card on the field, destroy that target. So, okay, I'm starting to see the vision. Should summon out Coelacanth, spell summon out some Golden Flying Fish, maybe some Deep Sea Macro Treatment as well. And then you do stuff with that, you know, pop your opponent's field. You've got negates for your Coelacanth. Okay, I'm starting to see it. And Deep Sea Macro Treatment actually has a decent effect for pairing with that. It says when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, all face up water monster you control gain 500 attack until the end of its turn. Okay, I'm seeing the inkling of a strategy here. I'm seeing the inkling of something we can do with Coelacanth. Maybe that'll be enough. I don't know. Probably not, but I'm seeing something there. Let me have this hope. Let me have this cope. Okay. Oh man. Not the best, but it's something at least. Maybe you can do an OTK with that. That's very resilient to get your opponent things. Next up, we got Warriors. Okay, Warriors have been tried and true in the past. What have they got for us now? Let them cook. We got Field Commander Raz, the level 4 Earth Warrior, 1600 attack, 1200 defense. Says when this card normal or special summon, choose one level 4 or lower Warrior monster from your deck, except Field Commander Raz, and place it on top of your deck. Okay, I guess. It's kind of like a jank Rhoda, but like, frankly, you're draw logging yourself for a turn, kind of in a weird way. Sure, the monster you're getting is probably the monster you want at that time, but your opponent will know about it as well. So I'm not feeling this one that hot. This one might not be the best here, but maybe Immortal Bushi can be something. Level 3 Dark Warrior, 1200 attack, 200 defense. Says while this face-up card is on the field, it cannot be treated except for the tribute summon of a warrior type monster. During your standby phase, if this card is in your graveyard and all the monsters in your graveyard are warrior type, special summon this card. You must also control no monsters to activate and resolve this effect. Okay, that's something. That seems pretty neat. You get to keep bringing it back. It's immortal. Maybe tribute it for your warrior tribute monsters. I don't necessarily know what those are, but maybe there's something out there. So, maybe this could be something. I don't know. This is probably not that good. I mean, you can see 6 Samurais playing it. You can tribute it for like a Grandmaster if you don't have any other 6 Sams in rotation. So that's a way to get it out. I don't hate that, but frankly, this thing is probably not worth playing. But it's still a cool card, and maybe we'll be playing it, worth playing at least in the future. Next up, we got Insects. Okay, Insects, maybe we'll do something here. Aztec be the Worm Warrior. Okay, this looks similar to Doom Dozer. Hold up, could it be good? 1900 attack, 400 defense. It cannot be normal summon set. Must be special summoned by banishing one insect type monster from your graveyard. Cannot be special summoned by other ways. If this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, send the top card of their deck to the graveyard. Not as good as Doom Dozer, but it's something for insect decks. It gets you an extra body on board, so maybe there's something there. Probably not. I don't think insects are really worth playing here if that's the only support they get, but maybe in the future this card will come up. Next up, we got Beasts. Okay, Beasts have been okay in the past. Remember the Flaming Eternity days? Okay, remember going back to that time. Hopefully we can do something here. You can see Koala, once per turn, you can target one face-up or monster your opponent controls. Change its attack to 0 until the end of this turn. You must control a Beast-type monster on this card, then to activate and to resolve this effect. 100 attack, 1600 defense. I don't think that'll do it. Oh, no, that's rough. Oh, man, that's not that good. Maybe if you're playing Beast deck already, you want to play this, but like, bring it off Rescue Cat, and then you reduce them down, attack over it with the other thing you brought out, but is that good? Not really, I don't think. Damn, that's rough. I was really hoping some of the archetype-specific support could help, or attribute or type-specific support could help against Dark, but, that's rough. Wait, this just in? Okay, I hear that there is some support in the set for anti-attribute and type strategy. Okay. Wait, we got some haters in the set. Maybe that will help. Okay, I'm glad to hear it. Clearly, they knew that the Dark attribute was too powerful here, so they must have printed some support to stop that. Let's see the anti-attribute support in the set. Acidic Downpour. Okay, Field Spell. All Earth monsters. Oh, okay, all Earth monsters lose 500 attack and gain 400 defense. My mind is boggles a little bit. Why? Who was asking for this? What Earth strategy was dominant enough to ask for Acidic Downpour? I mean, I guess you can use it to boost up the defense of your Earth monster if you're playing an Earth focus deck, but like, we got Chorus of Sanctuary for that. If you want that, like, oh my goodness, I don't know what they're doing anymore. I mean, this is the inverse of Gaia Power, but like, do we need that? No, we need anti-Dark support. Oh my word. I mean, yes, there is anti-Dark support already in the form of like Shadow and Prison Mirror. I know that already. You can get off my back for that. But it would be really nice if there was some more anti-Dark support in this set. Maybe the type like Fiend or something like that, or maybe Dragon for Dark Arm Dragon. Let's see. We got Magnetic Mosquito, level 3, Insect Flip effect, 300 attack, 1000 defense, so its effect must be worth it. Flip, destroy all machine monsters on the field. I mean, this one doesn't really do it. Like, do we need more anti-machine support? We've already got System Down, which is probably the best anti-machine support we can have. I don't know. This just seems really bad. So yeah, that's not good. It's an insect though, so we can pair it with that Secopede at least. Oh, that's rough. I mean, maybe there's some hope in the extra deck. Okay, maybe fusion cards can get an additional buff, and we've seen some fusion monsters already in this video. They weren't that good, but maybe there are new ways to summon a fusion monster that make them a little bit better. Super Poly, that's really good. Quick play spell. Discard one card. Fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck using monster from either field. As fusion material, neither player can activate card or effect in response to the card activation. That's really good. That's actually really, really good. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That's a very good effect. Unfortunately, it does not really help us here because the fusion materials on Fusion Monsters now, at this period in the game's history, are not really generic enough to make this something that we can actually use to psych up our opponent's stuff. There are some that do that, like, Dark Gaia or Malicious Fiend that we saw earlier in the video, but those need Dark Fusion to be summoned out. So you probably can't summon them out, and so it's not really the best right now. But in future formats, this thing will become a powerhouse, so I figured it's good to mention now. Chain Material, another thing that's very good for fusion summoning. Like, I'm not going to debate that. It says, anytime you fusion summon a monster this turn, you can remove from play from your side of the hand, or field, deck, hand, or graveyard fusion material monsters that are listed on the fusion monster card, and use them as fusion material monsters. You cannot attack during the turn this card effect is activated. If you use the effect for a fusion summon, the summoned fusion monster is destroyed during the end phase. I can still put things in grave for you, like maybe you want to build up into an Elemental Hero Shining Wingman, and you use it to bring out a Flare Wingman, and then you can get it engraved for like a Miracle Fusion. Like, I don't know. There's stuff you can do with that. This card can see some play in niche scenarios and niche decks, but mainly it's just used for FTKs like later on in the game's history. But right now, it's not really doing much. Next up, we got Dimension Explosion. Quick play spell says return one face-up fusion monster you control the extra deck. Both players select up to 2 of their monsters that are removed from play and spell to summon them. Honestly, I think this is going to be a boon to dark decks. Like, if you play this against a dark deck, it will happily take that. So this thing is not really the best, but I see the vision here. Again, it's for like decks that play things like Miracle Fusion or Dark Calling, right? You banish things from your graveyard, fusion summon out something, Dimension Explode, and get them back. So it's sort of a jank version to do that, but frankly, it's not really the best in my opinion. So I've sort of accepted the fact that nothing can rival the dark deck, and now that all that's left to do is go through the miscellaneous slop that was released in this set that are just not really that good and didn't really have a home to talk about elsewhere. So let's talk about Cry Havoc. This is a continuous trap. So you can remove from play 1 monster from your graveyard to normal summon or set 1 normal monster from your hand. You can only activate this effect during your main phase. Now, you might read this and be like, oh, cool, it's Gemini support, but it's not actually Gemini support because Gemini monsters are not treated as normal monsters while in your hand. So you can't actually use it for that, and it's just kind of bad. I mean, you can get monsters on field, I guess, but like, is it worth it? Probably not. So I don't think this thing is that good. But there was a new normal monster released in this set as well. Atlantean Pikeman, level 2 Sea Serpent, 1400 attack, 0 defense. And it talks about the great Ocean Lord who's reigned over these depths, is served by these Lancers. Deep sea creatures exist in fear of facing the stream of attacks their Lancers are capable of. But unfortunately, with 1400 attack, not much that these attacks are probably capable of, in my opinion. This thing is not a fish. I don't know why they didn't make it a fish for the Deep Sea Kelacanth stuff, but maybe they thought that would be too strong. I don't know. But anyways, moving on to another monster here, an effect monster this time. We got Black Veloci, an Earth level 4 dinosaur, 1800 attack, 300 defense. Says if this card attacks an opponent's monster, this card gains 400 attack during the damage step only. If this card is attacked by an opponent's monster, this card loses 400 attack during the damage step only. So it's basically a Steamroid, except on a dinosaur. And dinosaurs are a bit worse of a type than machines at this point in time, so not really worth playing in my opinion. Next up, we got Spell Chronicle, a very interesting continuous spell that unfortunately not really good in this form, in my opinion. Continuous spell card. This is activate this card by sending your entire hand to the graveyard. Banish 5 spell traps from your deck. Each time your opponent activates a spell card, place 1 Chronicle counter on this card. When that spell card resolves, you can remove 2 Chronicle counters from this card. Your opponent chooses 1 card banished by this card's effect for you to add to your hand. If this face-up card in the spell trap zone leave the field, you take 500 damage for each card currently banished by this card's effect. Now, the downside of this is that 1, you lose your entire hand, but 2, your opponent has so much control over what this card does for you, right? Because you only get Chronicle counters when your opponent activates a spell card. So they get to choose how many Chronicle counters the thing has realistically. And 2, they get to choose one of the banished cards to add to your hand. So realistically, you're not getting much choice over getting one of those things back. And also, you're potentially giving yourself a 2500 burn card liability here if they do manage to clear this thing. So this thing is just not really that good overall. I know sees play later in the game's history in some niche strategies for various reasons. We'll get to when we get to those parts of the game's history. But here, it's just not really that good. Next up, we got Transmigration Break. That's a continuous trap. This is any cards that would be returned to the deck from the graveyard or removed from play instead. So, this could be used against something like Pot of Avarice or Transmigration Prophecy, but frankly, not many decks actually do this sort of thing here. So it's not really that good. It's potentially a side deck card printed too early, so maybe against decks that would actually suffer against this, it will be good. But right now, there's nothing in the format that does that, really. Next up, we got Dark-Eyed Illusionist, which is I don't know if it's the worst card in this set, but it's definitely up there. It's a level 2 dark, flip effect, 0 attack, 14 defenses, target 1 monster on the field, counter attack while this card stays up on the field. So there are a couple different options here. 1, you manage to stall your opponent from attacking long enough to actually flip this thing up, stop that monster from attacking anyways. But if you've already got stall stuff going on, you don't really need this effect. 2, your opponent attacks into it directly, and let's say they attack him with something weak enough that this thing actually survives, then that monster can attack, but it's weak enough that like you don't care if it attacks again, because your opponent can just bring out a stronger monster, attack over your monster, and then they can attack in again. So you don't really care about that. 2, your opponent actually has a big monster that can beat over this thing, and then it's destroyed by battle, and you can't do anything with it anyways. So this thing is just bad on so many levels. I think it was just a DMR card that got brought over here too late, but it's just very comically bad here. And I think it probably would have been comically bad at the time as well. But that's going to do it for all the new cards added to Dad Return. We've made it through the Dark Gauntlet here. And unfortunately, I think the results of that gauntlet has just been that Dad is just busted. Dark decks are just busted. So this deck is kind of a tier 0 deck in this format. And let's just see an example deck list for it. They'll also have linked in the description down below if you want to just dive into it yourself. But yeah, I mean, once you see the deck list, you'll just realize how powerful it is. Now, this list here was created and piloted by Jazz, who's a frequent duelist in these retro formats, and it actually won the last Dad Return tournament that was held on Format Library. And I'll be linking to that Discord down below as well if you want to play this format over there too. But also on the YGO from Zero Discord server linked in the description down below. We'll be holding a tournament for this later this month if you're watching this when the video was released. But this deck is just so good. You've got triple Dark Arm Dragon. That's really the only dark monster you need, because you've got other dark monsters like Demok, which is very good to bring back up something like Dimfuse or Return from a Different Dimension, and many ways to banish it with things like Allure of Darkness or just with Dad's effect here. You've also got the hero engine, because fun fact, most of the hero monsters are dark. Stratos is not at the wind, but you do have Dasher. You've got, Disc Commander, you've got Mally. You got so many of these dark monsters. And also Mally, especially compare with the Greffer. You pitch a Mally to special summon out the Greffer, and then you pitch another thing from hand to do other things, but you also get to banish a Mally from graveyard to bring it out. You can also just send the Mally from deck with the Greffer to then banish it and get more cards on field. So it's just completely correct. You've got a DD Crow here to stop your opponent's plays, but also to fuel your own graveyard. I mean, this deck is just so good. This deck is just busted out of the wazoo. And I mean, this thing is definitely tier 0. I've actually released a video featuring this deck, for a Wheel Wednesday. So I'll probably add that to the Dad Return Duels channel. If you want to see more of this sort of deck in action, I'll also be just doing a regular gameplay video with it later on the channel. But it is just so powerful. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to go deeper into the deck list there when I cover it there. But this thing is just so strong, so good, and can just do so much. It really is like, not a modern combo deck, but it is approaching the level where like combo decks are becoming more of a thing, right? They haven't really been as much of a thing up to this point, but now with Dad Return, like there's definitely a lot of flexibility in how you structure your plays, and it's just so good. So it's deck tier 0 for sure. But let me know what you think about this deck down in the comments below, and also as the format as a whole. As we dive into these past formats, things can occasionally surprise us. So maybe there are some surprising things that can come out of this. Maybe we'll realize the Deep Sea Coelacanth Decay is actually something that can compete with this, or just another deck in this format as well can compete with it as well. Six Sam's actually managed to win an event around this time period, not quite with this ban list, but with the dark cards out and running around. So maybe there is some hope for some other decks as well. We'll just have to sort of find out by diving into the format here. I'm not sure how long I'll spend in this format, probably less time than I spent in Perfect Circle format, because there's a bit less to discover here, I think, but it should still be a fun ride while we have it. So I hope that you stick with me for that ride and subscribe to the channel, so that way you know when new videos come out for this format and just any other future formats that I cover on the channel. If you want to support me directly, I have a Patreon linked in the description down below, and if you join the Patreon, you get a shout out in these videos. So big shout outs to Rincewind, Porkchopkin, Brent Knocker, Tyler Compton, GeoMyFest, Dumptruck, Scout Zero, and Damon Hess. It means a lot that you all support me, so I encourage you to make more videos like this one in the future. I hope that you all enjoyed as always, and until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero. I'm signing off. Peace.